There's a place on this earth where the air is so thin that your lungs burn with every breath. A place where the wind howls across a barren plateau with such ferocity that trees refuse to grow. A place so high above the ocean that clouds drift beneath your feet. And in this place, in this impossible, desolate, wind-ravaged landscape, someone or something built one of the most extraordinary cities the ancient world has ever known. Welcome to Tiwanaku. 13,000 feet above sea level, on the vast and unforgiving altiplano of Bolivia, there stand the ruins of a civilization that modern science still struggles to explain. Massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, were cut with a precision that rivals modern laser technology and transported across distances that should have been impossible for any ancient people. A single gateway carved from a monolithic slab of andesite contains a calendar so sophisticated that it tracks celestial events our own astronomers only confirmed in the last century. Walls were assembled with interlocking cuts so perfect that no mortar was needed, and after thousands of years, those joints remain tight enough that you cannot slide a razor blade between them. This is not a fairy tale. This is not legend. These stones are real. You can walk among them today. You can press your hand against them and feel the impossible smoothness of their surfaces. You can trace the carvings with your fingertips and wonder, as generations before you have wondered, how any of this was possible. The conventional archaeological narrative tells us that Tiwanaku was built by a pre-Incan civilization beginning around 500 years before the Common Era, reaching its peak around the 8th or 9th century and collapsing sometime around 1100. That is the story you will find in most textbooks, but that story has always been uncomfortable. It has always had gaps. It has always raised more questions than it answers. Because the truth is, nobody knows with absolute certainty who built Tiwanaku. Nobody knows how they moved stones that weigh as much as a modern locomotive across miles of treacherous terrain at an altitude where even healthy people struggle to function. Nobody knows how they cut andesite, one of the hardest volcanic stones on Earth, with the kind of accuracy that would make a modern stonemason weep with envy. And nobody, despite over a century of serious archaeological study, can fully explain the astronomical knowledge encoded in the gate of the sun, knowledge that implies an understanding of the cosmos far beyond what any ancient high-altitude farming community should have possessed. What we are about to explore together is one of the greatest mysteries in the history of human civilization. We are going to journey to the roof of the world, to a place where the ruins speak louder than any written record, where the stones themselves are the testimony, and where every new discovery seems to deepen the mystery rather than solve it. This is the story of Tiwanaku and the Gate of the Sun, and it begins not with answers, but with a question that has echoed across the centuries. Who built this place and why? To understand Tiwanaku, you must first understand the landscape that surrounds it. The altiplano, sometimes called the high plain, is one of the most extreme environments on the planet. It stretches across a vast inland plateau in the central Andes, bordered by mountain ranges whose peaks scrape the sky at over 20,000 feet. The plateau itself sits at an average elevation of roughly 12,000 feet, though Tiwanaku is positioned even higher, at approximately 12,600 feet according to some measurements, and closer to 13,000 according to others, depending on the exact point of reference. At this altitude, the atmospheric pressure is roughly 60% of what you experience at sea level. The oxygen content of each breath is dramatically reduced. Visitors from lower elevations routinely experience altitude sickness, headaches, nausea, dizziness, and fatigue that can be debilitating. Physical labor, the kind of bone-crushing, muscle-tearing labor required to quarry, transport, and assemble massive stone blocks, is exponentially more difficult here than it would be at lower elevations. The climate is harsh. Temperatures can swing wildly within a single day, from blazing heat under the unfiltered high-altitude sun to freezing cold once that sun drops below the horizon. Rainfall is limited. The soil is thin and not particularly fertile by the standards of the lush lowlands that exist on either side of the Andes. Frost can occur in any month of the year. Growing seasons are short and unpredictable. In short, this is one of the last places on Earth where you would expect a great civilization to arise. And yet arise it did, not just a modest settlement, not just a collection of huts and farming terraces, but a monumental city, a center of power and culture that at its peak may have influenced or controlled a territory spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles. The ruins of Tiwanaku sit approximately 45 miles west of La Paz, the administrative capital of Bolivia, and about 9 miles south of the shores of Lake Titicaca. This lake is itself a marvel, the highest navigable body of water in the world, a vast inland sea of startling blue that stretches across the border between Bolivia and Peru. At over 3,400 square miles, Lake Titicaca is larger than some small nations. Its maximum depth reaches nearly 1,000 feet, and its very existence at such an altitude has puzzled scientists for generations. The relationship between Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca is central to the mystery. Today, the ruins sit roughly 9 miles from the lake's southern shore, but there is compelling evidence, geological, archaeological, and mythological, that the lake was once much larger, or that its shoreline was once much closer to the city. Some researchers have proposed that Tiwanaku was originally a lakeside city, perhaps even a port city, connected to the waters of Titicaca by canals and harbors. Remnants of what appear to be ancient docks or waterfront structures have been identified at the site, though this interpretation remains controversial. If Tiwanaku was indeed a lake port, the implications are staggering. It would mean either that the lake has receded dramatically since the city was built, which is geologically possible but raises questions about the timeline, or that the city is far older than conventional archaeology suggests, old enough to have witnessed significant changes in the regional hydrology. We will return to the question of age later. For now, let us walk among the ruins themselves and see what the stones have to tell us. The archaeological site of Tiwanaku covers an area of approximately 2.5 square miles, though many researchers believe the ancient city was considerably larger, with outlying structures and residential areas extending well beyond the ceremonial core that has been the focus of most excavations. Indeed, ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in recent decades have revealed numerous buried structures that have never been excavated, suggesting that what we see on the surface today is only a fraction of what once existed. The site has been divided by archaeologists into several major zones and structures, each one remarkable in its own right. Let us begin with the most iconic feature, the one that has captivated explorers, scholars, and dreamers for centuries: the Gate of the Sun. This extraordinary monument is a single block of andesite, a hard, dense volcanic stone, carved into a gateway approximately 9.5 feet tall and 13 feet wide, weighing an estimated 10 tons. It stands today in the northwest corner of the Calisassia, one of the site's principal ceremonial enclosures, though there is strong evidence that this was not its original location. The gate appears to have been moved at some point in the distant past, and its original placement within the site remains a subject of debate. The surface of the Gate of the Sun is covered in elaborate relief carvings of extraordinary precision and complexity. At the center of the upper register, the lintel, is a figure that has come to be known as the Staff God, sometimes also called the Weeping God or the Gateway God. This figure stands in a frontal pose, arms outstretched, holding a staff or scepter in each hand. The face is broad and stylized, with large, round eyes from which rays or tears appear to emanate. The headdress is elaborate, radiating outward in a manner that many have compared to the rays of the sun. Flanking this central figure, arranged in 3 rows on either side, are 48 smaller figures, sometimes described as winged attendants or messengers. 32 of these figures have human faces. 16 have the faces of condors. All of them are shown in profile, facing inward toward the central staff god, as if in procession or supplication. They carry staffs or scepters of their own, and their postures suggest movement, energy, purpose. Below these rows of attendants, running along the bottom of the lintel, is a series of smaller carved faces, often described as a frieze of faces, which repeat in a pattern that some researchers have interpreted as calendrical in nature. And it is here in the details of these carvings that the mystery deepens to an almost unfathomable degree. The calendar encoded in the gate of the sun has been studied by astronomers, archaeologists, mathematicians, and independent researchers for well over a century. And while there is no universal consensus on every detail of its interpretation, several remarkable findings have emerged that are difficult to dismiss. One of the most extensive and controversial analyses of the Gate of the Sun calendar was conducted by Arthur Pesnansky, a Bolivian archaeologist of Austrian descent who spent nearly 50 years studying Tiwanaku in the first half of the 20th century. Pesnansky dedicated his life to the ruins, publishing a monumental 4-volume work titled Tiwanaku, the Cradle of American Man, in which he argued, among other things, that the calendar carved on the Gate of the Sun was a sophisticated solar and lunar calendar that divided the year into 12 months of 24 days each, for a total of 288 days, plus additional intercalary periods to reconcile the calendar with the actual solar year. Pesnansky's interpretation was radical. He argued that the calendar did not correspond to the current axial tilt of the Earth, which is approximately 23.5 degrees, but rather to a tilt of approximately 23 degrees and 8 minutes, a configuration that, according to astronomical calculations, would have existed roughly 15,000 years before the Common Era. If Pesnansky was correct, the Gate of the Sun was carved not a mere 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, but approximately 17,000 years ago, making Tiwanaku one of the oldest monumental sites on Earth, far older than the pyramids of Egypt, far older than Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, far older than any civilization recognized by mainstream archaeology. This dating has been fiercely contested. Most mainstream archaeologists place the construction of the Gate of the Sun in the period between approximately 400 and 800 of the Common Era, based on radiocarbon dating of organic materials found at the site, ceramic chronologies, and other standard dating methods. They argue that Pesnansky's astronomical dating is based on assumptions and interpretations of the carvings that are not universally accepted, and that the astronomical alignment he proposed could be coincidental or the result of a different calendrical system that does not correspond to axial tilt. But the debate has never been fully resolved, and as we shall see, there are other lines of evidence that suggest Tiwanaku may indeed be far older than the conventional chronology allows. What is not disputed by anyone is the sheer sophistication of the carvings themselves. The Gate of the Sun is not a crude or primitive monument. It is a work of extraordinary skill and precision, carved into one of the hardest stones known to the ancient world. The lines are clean, the proportions are consistent, the symmetry is remarkable. The level of detail in the individual figures, the attendants, the central deity, the frieze of faces, is far beyond what one would expect from a society that, according to the conventional narrative, lacked metal tools harder than bronze and had no written language. This is one of the recurring paradoxes of Tiwanaku. The level of technical achievement visible in the stonework seems to far exceed what should have been possible given the technological toolkit attributed to the builders. And the Gate of the Sun, while the most famous example, is far from the only one. Let us move now from the Gate of the Sun to the broader architectural complex that surrounds it, beginning with the Calisassia. The Calisassia is a large, roughly rectangular enclosure measuring approximately 430 feet by 400 feet. Its walls are constructed of massive upright stone pillars, alternating with sections of smaller, fitted stonework. The name Calisassia is thought to derive from a phrase meaning standing stones in the Aymara language, the indigenous language of the region, and the name is fitting. The standing stones that form the perimeter of the enclosure are enormous, some reaching heights of 12 feet or more, and they are set into the ground with a stability that has allowed them to remain upright for millennia. The Calisassia is not merely an enclosure, it is an astronomical observatory. The walls and standing stones are oriented with remarkable precision to mark the positions of the sun at the solstices and equinoxes. Standing at certain points within the enclosure, an observer can watch the sun rise at exactly the right point along the eastern wall on the summer solstice, the winter solstice, and the equinoxes. These alignments are not approximate, they are precise, and they have been confirmed by multiple independent surveys using modern instruments. This means that whoever designed the Calisassia had a detailed understanding of the annual motion of the sun across the sky, an understanding that required sustained, systematic observation over many years, possibly many generations. They understood the concept of the solstice, the moment when the sun reaches its northernmost or southernmost point and appears to stand still before reversing its direction of travel along the horizon. They understood the equinox, the moment when day and night are of equal length, and they encoded this understanding into stone with a precision that implies not just knowledge, but mastery. The astronomical alignments of the Calisassia were among the pieces of evidence that Pisnansky used to support his extreme dating of the site. He argued that the alignments were not precisely calibrated to the current axial tilt of the Earth, but to a slightly different tilt, and that this discrepancy could be used to calculate the age of the structure. His calculations, as mentioned earlier, pointed to a date of approximately 15,000 years before the Common Era. Mainstream archaeologists have responded by arguing that the alignments are within the margin of error that would be expected for the current epoch, and that Pisnansky's measurements may have been influenced by the fact that the site has been damaged, rebuilt, and partially reconstructed multiple times over the centuries, including a controversial reconstruction in the mid-20th century that may have altered the positions of some of the standing stones. This is a fair criticism. The site has indeed been heavily damaged. After the fall of the Tiwanaku civilization, the ruins were used as a quarry by local communities and later by colonial authorities. Stones were removed for use in building churches, roads, and bridges. The site was further damaged by treasure hunters, amateur excavators, and even a railroad company that ran a line directly through part of the ruins in the early 20th century. Much of what you see at Tiwanaku today has been reconstructed or repositioned by archaeologists, and there is legitimate debate about how accurately those reconstructions reflect the original layout. But even accounting for these caveats, the astronomical sophistication of the Calisassia is undeniable. This was a structure designed with the sky in mind, a monumental instrument for tracking the heavens, built at an altitude where the sky is closer and clearer than almost anywhere else on Earth. Within the Calisassia, in addition to the Gate of the Sun, there are several other notable features. One of the most striking is the Ponce monolith, a large stone statue standing approximately 7.5 feet tall, depicting a human figure with a rigid frontal pose, large staring eyes, and hands clasped at the waist, one hand holding what appears to be a kiro, a ceremonial drinking vessel, and the other holding an object that has been variously interpreted as a tablet, a book, or some other ritual item. The Ponce monolith is remarkable for several reasons. The carving is precise and detailed, with elaborate geometric patterns adorning the figure's clothing and headdress. The face is stylized but expressive, with a strong jaw, prominent nose, and eyes that seem to look through you rather than at you. The overall effect is one of power, authority, and permanence. This was not a casual carving. It was a statement, a declaration of importance and identity. But who is depicted? Is this a ruler, a priest, a god? The conventional interpretation suggests it may represent one of Tiwanaku's elite, perhaps a king or high priest dressed in ceremonial regalia. But the truth is, we do not know. The Tiwanaku civilization left no written records that we have been able to decipher. Their story is told entirely through their stones, their ceramics, their textiles, and the legends of the peoples who came after them. Near the Ponce monolith stands the frail monolith, another large stone figure with similar stylistic features but different details. And scattered throughout the site are numerous other carved stones, fragments of statuary and architectural elements that hint at a once vast collection of monumental art that has been largely lost to time and human destruction. Let us leave the callous Asia now and walk to another of Tiwanaku's most remarkable structures, the Akapana. The Akapana is or was a massive stepped pyramid, the largest structure at the site. In its original form, it is believed to have stood approximately 56 feet tall, with a base measuring roughly 650 feet on each side. The pyramid had 7 terraced levels, each faced with precisely cut stone blocks, rising in steps to a flat summit that may have supported a temple or other structure. Today, the Akapana is a shadow of its former self. Centuries of looting, erosion, and neglect have reduced it to a large earthen mound with only scattered remnants of its original stone facing visible. But even in its ruined state, the Akapana is impressive. Its sheer scale speaks to a level of organized labor and engineering ambition that is remarkable for any ancient society, let alone one operating at 13,000 feet above sea level. One of the most intriguing features of the Akapana is its internal drainage system. Excavations have revealed a complex network of stone channels running through the interior of the pyramid, designed to collect rainwater from the summit and channel it down through the structure in a controlled fashion. These channels are lined with precisely cut stone and connected at junctions with carefully fitted joints. The system is not a simple series of gutters. It is a sophisticated hydraulic engineering project designed to manage water flow through a massive stone structure with efficiency and precision. Why would a pyramid need an internal drainage system? The conventional explanation is practical. The Altiplano receives seasonal rainfall, and without proper drainage, water collecting on the flat summit of the pyramid would seep into the earthen core and eventually destabilize the structure. The drainage system was a solution to an engineering problem, a way to keep the pyramid intact in a climate where water, ice, and frost heave are constant threats to any large earthen construction. But some researchers have proposed more imaginative explanations. They suggest that the drainage system may have been designed to produce specific visual or auditory effects, to create cascades of water flowing down the terraced faces of the pyramid during rainstorms, or to produce sounds as the water moved through the channels, transforming the pyramid into a kind of water instrument, a structure that sang or roared with the voice of the rain. Whether or not this interpretation is correct, the drainage system of the Akapana demonstrates a level of engineering sophistication that goes well beyond simple construction. The builders of this pyramid understood hydraulics. They understood the behavior of water on and within large structures. They understood the properties of the materials they were working with. And they designed a system to manage these forces that still, after thousands of years of neglect and destruction, survives in recognizable form. Adjacent to the Akapana and connected to it by what appears to have been a ceremonial pathway, lies a structure that is in many ways even more mysterious. It is called the Pumapunku. If the Gate of the Sun is the face of Tiwanaku's mystery, Pumapunku is its beating heart. Pumapunku, which translates roughly as the door of the Puma, or the gate of the Puma, is a ruined platform and temple complex located approximately 1,000 feet southwest of the main Tiwanaku site. It consists of a large, artificially raised platform, originally faced with enormous stone blocks, upon which stood a complex of buildings and structures made from some of the most precisely engineered stonework ever discovered anywhere in the ancient world. Let us be very specific about what has been found at Pumapunku because the details matter. The platform itself was constructed from enormous blocks of red sandstone, some weighing over 130 tons. These blocks were quarried from a site approximately 6 miles away across difficult terrain and transported to Pumapunku by methods that remain unknown. 6 miles may not sound like a great distance, but consider the conditions. The terrain is rough and uneven. The altitude makes every physical task exponentially more difficult. There are no forests in the region to provide timber for rollers or sledges. There are no rivers between the quarry and the construction site that could have been used for water transport, and the blocks weigh as much as a fully loaded modern freight car. How were they moved? The honest answer is that nobody knows. Theories range from the conventional, organized human labor using ropes, ramps, and levers, to the unconventional, including the use of techniques and technologies that have been lost to history. We will examine these theories in detail later, but for now, let us simply acknowledge the fact. Stones weighing over 100 tons were moved 6 miles across the Altiplano and placed with precision at Pumapunku. This happened. The evidence is right there in front of you. But the red sandstone blocks, as impressive as they are not the most remarkable feature of Pumapunku. That distinction belongs to the smaller gray stones that were used for the finer construction work. These stones are andesite, and they are the source of some of the most heated debates in all of archaeology. Andesite is a volcanic stone, extremely hard and dense. On the Mohs scale of mineral hardness, andesite typically rates between 6 and 7, comparable to steel. It is not a stone that can be easily worked with primitive tools. Cutting andesite with any precision requires tools that are at least as hard as the stone itself, and the kind of precision visible at Pumapunku would challenge modern masons equipped with diamond-tipped power tools. And yet the andesite blocks at Pumapunku are cut with a precision that borders on the unbelievable. Consider the H blocks, so named because of their distinctive shape when viewed from above. These are large, flat stones, roughly 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, cut into a form that resembles the letter H. The surfaces of these blocks are perfectly flat, smooth to the touch, with edges that meet at exact right angles. The tolerances, the degree of accuracy in the cuts, are measured not in inches but in fractions of millimeters. The blocks are clearly designed to interlock with one another, fitting together like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle, and when assembled, they create walls and structures of extraordinary stability without the use of any mortar or binding agent. Each H block contains a series of precisely cut recesses, grooves, and channels that correspond to matching features on adjacent blocks. Some of these features appear to have been designed to receive metal clamps or tie stones, small pieces of metal that were poured in molten form into matching channels on adjoining blocks to lock them together. This technique, known as metal clamping or metal stapling, has been found at several ancient sites around the world, including in Egypt and Greece, but the examples at Pumapunku are among the most precisely executed ever discovered. Analysis of the metal used in these clamps has revealed that it is a copper-arsenic-nickel alloy, a specific composition that was not randomly occurring but deliberately manufactured. The alloy was designed for a specific purpose, and its composition suggests a level of metallurgical knowledge that is more advanced than what is typically attributed to pre-Columbian South American societies. But the H blocks are just one type of stone found at Pumapunku. There are also precisely cut blocks with internal right angles, stepped recesses, and flat surfaces that are so smooth they appear almost polished. There are blocks with perfectly circular drill holes, uniform in diameter and depth, that appear to have been created with some kind of rotary drilling tool. There are blocks with long, straight grooves of uniform width and depth, running parallel to one another with a consistency that suggests the use of a guide or template. Let us pause here and consider what we are looking at. We are at 13,000 feet above sea level, in one of the most remote and inhospitable environments on Earth. We are looking at stones that are among the hardest naturally occurring materials available, and these stones have been cut, shaped, drilled, and polished with a level of precision that would require, in the modern world, industrial-grade power tools, precision measuring instruments, and skilled operators. The conventional explanation is that the builders of Pumapunku achieved all of this using stone hammers, copper chisels, and abrasive sand. That they pecked and ground the andesite into shape through patient, repetitive labor over months or years. That the precision was achieved through skill, experience, and an obsessive attention to detail that we can scarcely imagine today. This explanation is not impossible. Humans are capable of extraordinary feats when motivated and organized. The great cathedrals of medieval Europe were built with relatively simple tools over the course of decades or centuries. The pyramids of Egypt were constructed with copper tools, wooden sledges, and organized human labor on a massive scale. It is not inherently absurd to suggest that the builders of Pumapunku achieved their results through similar means, but there are problems with this explanation. Significant problems. First, copper is softer than andesite. A copper chisel will deform and blunt rapidly when used against andesite. While it is possible to cut hard stone with softer tools if you use an abrasive intermediary, such as sand, this process is extremely slow and does not easily produce the kind of clean, sharp edges visible on the Pumapunku blocks. The surfaces at Pumapunku do not show the kinds of tool marks you would expect from manual pecking and grinding. They show smooth, flat surfaces and clean, sharp edges that are more consistent with cutting than with gradual abrasion. Second, the precision is difficult to explain. Modern stonemasons who have examined the blocks at Pumapunku have expressed astonishment at the tolerances achieved. Flat surfaces that deviate by less than a fraction of a millimeter over several feet. Right angles that are accurate to within arc minutes. Drill holes that are uniform in diameter to within 1/100th of an inch. This level of precision requires not just skill but the ability to measure, to verify, and to correct with instruments of considerable accuracy. What instruments did the builders of Pumapunku use? If they existed, none have survived. Third, there is the sheer volume of precision work. Pumapunku is not a single block or a single feature. It is an entire complex of precisely cut stones, hundreds of them, each one exhibiting the same extraordinary level of workmanship. This suggests not a single master craftsman performing a one-time feat, but a systematic, repeatable process, a technology, in the broadest sense of the word, that could be applied consistently across a large-scale construction project. The mystery of Pumapunku's stonework has given rise to a wide range of theories, some more credible than others. At one end of the spectrum, mainstream archaeologists maintain that the construction techniques, while impressive, are within the capabilities of a well-organized pre-industrial society with access to abundant labor and a deep tradition of stone craftsmanship. They point out that similar precision work has been found at other ancient sites around the world, and that humans have a long history of achieving remarkable results with simple tools. At the other end of the spectrum, alternative researchers have proposed that the builders of Pumapunku possess technologies that have been lost to history, technologies that may have included advanced power tools, precision measuring instruments, and construction techniques that we have not yet rediscovered. Some have gone even further, suggesting that the builders were not human at all, or that they received assistance from beings of unknown origin. Between these extremes, there are a range of intermediate positions. Some researchers have proposed that the Tiwanaku civilization developed unique techniques for working hard stone that are not represented in the archaeological record because the tools themselves were made of perishable materials, or because the techniques involved chemical or thermal processes that left no distinctive traces. Others have suggested that the precision visible at Pumapunku is an illusion, the result of modern observers projecting their own assumptions about manufacturing standards onto ancient craftsmanship, and that careful measurement would reveal greater irregularities than are apparent to the naked eye. This last suggestion has been tested, and it does not hold up. Multiple independent measurements of the Pumapunku blocks using modern precision instruments have confirmed that the surfaces are indeed flat to within fractions of a millimeter and that the angles are indeed accurate to within arc minutes. The precision is not an illusion. It is a measurable, documented fact, so we are left with a genuine mystery. How did the builders of Pumapunku achieve this level of precision? The honest answer, the intellectually rigorous answer, is that we do not know. We have theories, we have hypotheses, we have educated guesses, but we do not have a definitive answer. And any researcher, mainstream or alternative, who claims otherwise is overstating the evidence. Let us now turn to another aspect of Tiwanaku that deepens the mystery still further, the question of transportation. The stones used at Tiwanaku and Pumapunku came from multiple sources. The red sandstone blocks, as mentioned earlier, were quarried from a site approximately 6 miles away, but the andesite blocks came from much further afield. The nearest known source of the specific type of andesite used at Pumapunku is the Copacabana Peninsula on the shores of Lake Titicaca, approximately 56 miles from the construction site. Some researchers have suggested even more distant sources, 56 miles, over rough, high-altitude terrain, with blocks weighing up to 130 tons, at an elevation where physical labor is dramatically impaired by the thin atmosphere. How was this done? The conventional theories focus on organized human labor. Large numbers of workers, possibly numbering in the thousands, could have dragged the stones on wooden sledges or rollers, using ropes made from plant fibers. The route may have included sections of water transport across Lake Titicaca, using large reed boats or rafts. The labor may have been organized through a system of reciprocal obligation, similar to the Mita labor system used later by the Inca Empire, in which communities contributed labor to state projects in exchange for the redistribution of resources. These theories are plausible in principle. Organized human labor can accomplish extraordinary feats. The construction of the Egyptian pyramids, the building of Stonehenge, the creation of the Easter Island Moai, all of these demonstrate that ancient peoples were capable of moving and assembling enormous stones using relatively simple technologies. But there are specific challenges at Tiwanaku that make the transportation problem more difficult than at other ancient sites. The altitude is the most obvious challenge. At 13,000 feet, the reduced oxygen level makes sustained physical labor extremely taxing, even for people who are acclimatized to the altitude. The Aymara and Quechua peoples of the Altiplano have developed, over thousands of years, physiological adaptations to high-altitude living, including larger lung capacity, more efficient hemoglobin, and a higher density of capillaries. But even with these adaptations, the kind of sustained, heavy physical labor required to move 100-ton stones over long distances would have been extraordinarily demanding. The terrain is another challenge. The Altiplano is not a smooth, flat surface. It is broken by ravines, dry riverbeds, slopes, and areas of loose, sandy soil that would make dragging heavy stones extremely difficult. Unlike Egypt, where the Nile provided a flat, smooth waterway for transporting stones, or Stonehenge, where the rolling grasslands of Salisbury Plain offered a relatively smooth surface, the terrain between the quarries and Tiwanaku is rough and varied. The absence of timber is yet another challenge. The Altiplano is above the tree line. There are no forests within practical distance of the construction site. Rollers, sledges, levers, and other wooden implements would have to have been imported from the lowlands, adding another layer of logistical complexity to an already daunting project. Some researchers have proposed that the builders of Tiwanaku used a technique involving the freezing and thawing of water to move stones. By pouring water on the ground in front of a stone and allowing it to freeze, a smooth, low-friction surface could be created on which the stone could be slid. This technique is plausible in the cold nighttime temperatures of the Altiplano, and there is some experimental evidence to suggest it can work on a small scale. But scaling it up to move 100-ton stones over 50 miles stretches the concept to its limits. Others have suggested that the stones were transported by water, using the lake itself as a highway. If Tiwanaku was originally a lakeside or near lakeside city, and if the lake was once closer to the site than it is today, water transport would have been a practical option for at least part of the journey. Large reed boats, similar to the Tatora reed boats still used by the Yuru people of Lake Titicaca, could potentially carry significant loads if built large enough. But carrying a 100-ton stone on a reed boat is a proposition that has never been demonstrated experimentally, and the logistics of loading and unloading such a cargo would present formidable challenges. The truth is, we do not have a satisfying explanation for how the stones of Pumapunku were transported. The conventional theories are possible but strain credibility when applied to the specific conditions at Tiwanaku. The alternative theories are imaginative but lack empirical support. And the stones themselves offer no clues. They sit in their current positions, silent witnesses to a feat of engineering that we cannot fully explain. Let us now consider what lies beneath the surface of Tiwanaku, both literally and figuratively. One of the most fascinating structures at the site is the semi-subterranean temple, a sunken courtyard that was excavated into the ground rather than built above it. This roughly square enclosure, approximately 90 feet on each side and about 6.5 feet deep, is accessed by a staircase on its southern side. The walls of the courtyard are lined with stone blocks, and embedded in these walls are dozens of carved stone heads protruding from the surface like faces peering out from the stone itself. These carved heads are remarkable for their diversity. They depict a wide range of facial types with different nose shapes, eye shapes, lip shapes, and cranial structures. Some appear to represent local Andean peoples with broad faces, flat noses, and rounded features. Others appear to depict individuals from entirely different ethnic groups with longer faces, narrower features, and in some cases, unusual cranial shapes that do not correspond to any known local population. This diversity has been interpreted in various ways. The conventional interpretation is that the heads represent conquered peoples or tribute-paying groups from across Tiwanaku's sphere of influence, displayed as a demonstration of the city's power and reach. This is consistent with similar practices at other ancient sites, where images of foreigners or captives were displayed as symbols of imperial dominance. But alternative researchers have drawn attention to the extreme diversity of the faces and suggested that they may represent something more. Some have proposed that the heads depict visitors or delegates from distant lands, including regions far beyond the known trading networks of pre-Columbian South American civilizations. Others have suggested that the heads depict different races or ethnic groups that once gathered at Tiwanaku, implying that the city was a meeting point for peoples from across the globe at a time when such long-distance contact is not supposed to have occurred. These interpretations are speculative, and they are not supported by the mainstream archaeological community, but the faces themselves are real and their diversity is striking. They invite questions that are not easily dismissed. At the center of the semi-subterranean temple stands another monolith, the Bennett monolith, named after the archaeologist Wendell Bennett, who discovered it in 1932. This is the largest stone statue ever found at Tiwanaku, standing over 24 feet tall and weighing an estimated 20 tons. Like the Ponce monolith, it depicts a human figure in a rigid frontal pose, holding objects in its hands and decorated with elaborate geometric patterns. The figure's face is stylized, with large eyes, a broad nose, and a set, determined expression. The Bennett monolith was originally found in a damaged condition, having been broken at some point in the distant past. It has since been restored and is now displayed in La Paz, though a replica stands at the original site. The monolith is remarkable not only for its size but for the complexity and precision of its carvings, which include images of fish, condors, pumas, and geometric patterns that may have calendrical or cosmological significance. The cosmology and religion of the Tiwanaku civilization are subjects of intense scholarly interest, but they are also subjects about which we know relatively little with certainty. The Tiwanaku people left no written records that we have been able to decipher, so our understanding of their beliefs comes primarily from the iconography of their art and architecture, from the ethnographic records of later peoples who may have inherited some of their traditions, and from the accounts of Spanish chroniclers who arrived in the region in the 16th century, hundreds of years after Tiwanaku's collapse. The central deity of the Tiwanaku pantheon appears to have been the staff god, the figure depicted on the Gate of the Sun. This deity, or a very similar one, appears throughout Tiwanaku art on pottery, textiles, stone carvings, and metalwork. The staff god is consistently depicted in a frontal pose, with outstretched arms, holding staffs or scepters, and with a face that radiates rays or lines, often interpreted as solar rays or tears. The staff god is believed by many researchers to be a precursor to, or an earlier version of Viracocha, the creator god of Andean mythology who was later adopted and adapted by the Inca Empire. According to Inca legends recorded by Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century, Viracocha was a god who emerged from Lake Titicaca, created the sun, moon, and stars, fashioned the first humans from stone, and then traveled across the land, teaching civilization, agriculture, and the arts before departing across the ocean, never to return. The parallels between Viracocha and other creation myths from around the world are striking and have been noted by numerous scholars. The motif of a civilizing deity who emerges from the water, teaches humanity the arts of civilization, and then departs with a promise to return is found in cultures as far apart as Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and the Pacific Islands. Whether these parallels reflect a common source, a shared human psychological template, or mere coincidence is a question that remains open. What is particularly interesting about the Viracocha legend in the context of Tiwanaku is that the Inca themselves regarded Tiwanaku as the place where Viracocha began his creative work. When the Spanish arrived in the region, they found that the Inca revered Tiwanaku as a sacred site, a place of origin and power, even though the city had been in ruins for centuries by that time. The Inca did not claim to have built Tiwanaku. They attributed it to a race of giants who lived before the current age of humanity, beings who had been created and then destroyed by Viracocha in an earlier cycle of creation. This legend of giants is worth pausing over. The Inca were sophisticated empire builders who had a clear understanding of their own history and achievements. They did not typically attribute their own constructions to supernatural beings, but when it came to Tiwanaku, they made an exception. They looked at the massive stones, the precision engineering, the scale and ambition of the ruins, and they concluded that these things could not have been built by ordinary humans. They were the work of giants, of beings from an earlier age, an age of wonders that had passed. Were they right? Were the builders of Tiwanaku giants in a literal sense? Almost certainly not. There is no credible evidence for the existence of a race of giants in the Andes or anywhere else. But the legend is significant because it tells us something about how even the sophisticated Inca perceived Tiwanaku. They saw it as something extraordinary, something beyond the capabilities of ordinary human societies. And if the Inca, who were themselves master builders and engineers, were awed by Tiwanaku, perhaps we should take their awe seriously. Let us now address one of the most contentious questions in the study of Tiwanaku. How old is it really? The conventional archaeological chronology places the development of the Tiwanaku civilization in several phases. The earliest occupation of the site is dated to approximately 1500 years before the Common Era, making it roughly 3,500 years old. This early phase is associated with a relatively simple agricultural village, with modest mud brick structures and limited evidence of social complexity. The monumental construction, the great stone temples, the pyramids, the Gate of the Sun, is dated to the later phases of the civilization, beginning around the 5th century of the Common Era and continuing until the collapse, which is placed around 1100. This means that the most impressive structures at Tiwanaku are, according to the conventional chronology, roughly 1,000 to 1,500 years old. These dates are based primarily on radiocarbon dating of organic materials, such as charcoal, bone, and plant remains, found in association with the structures. Radiocarbon dating measures the decay of carbon-14, a radioactive isotope that accumulates in living organisms and begins to decay at a known rate after death. By measuring the amount of carbon-14 remaining in a sample, scientists can estimate when the organism died and, by extension, when the associated material was deposited. Radiocarbon dating is a powerful and generally reliable technique, but it has limitations. It does not date the stones themselves. It dates the organic materials found near the stones. This means that the dates tell us when organic material was deposited at the site, not necessarily when the stones were quarried, cut, or assembled. If the site was occupied over a long period, with multiple phases of construction, reconstruction, and habitation, the organic materials may reflect the later phases of activity rather than the original construction. This is not a trivial concern. Many ancient sites around the world have been shown to be older than their initial radiocarbon dates suggested, because the organic materials tested came from later phases of occupation rather than from the original construction. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, for example, was initially thought to date to the Neolithic period, around 9,000 years before the Common Era, but subsequent discoveries have pushed the date back even further, and some researchers have suggested that the site may have origins even older than the currently accepted dates. At Tiwanaku, the question of age is further complicated by the fact that the site has been extensively disturbed, both by natural processes and by human activity. Centuries of looting, farming, construction, and archaeological excavation have mixed and redistributed the material at the site, making it difficult to establish clear stratigraphic relationships between the organic materials and the stone structures. Then there is the evidence from the stones themselves. As we discussed earlier, the astronomical alignments of the calisassia and the calendrical carvings on the Gate of the Sun have been interpreted by some researchers, most notably Arthur Posnansky, as evidence that the site is far older than the conventional dates suggest. Posnansky's dating of approximately 15,000 years before the Common Era has been rejected by most mainstream archaeologists, but it has never been conclusively disproven. More recently, other lines of evidence have emerged that suggest Tiwanaku may be older than the conventional chronology allows. Studies of the sediments around the site have revealed evidence of significant changes in the level of Lake Titicaca over the millennia, with the lake standing at much higher levels during certain periods of the past. If Tiwanaku was originally a lakeside city, as some of the evidence suggests, the periods of high lake level would be candidates for the time of construction. Some of these high-level periods predate the conventional chronology by thousands of years. Additionally, geological studies of the site have identified evidence of significant seismic activity and possibly even catastrophic flooding at some point in the site's history. The stones at Pumapunku, for example, are scattered in a chaotic pattern that is inconsistent with gradual decay or human dismantlement. Some researchers have argued that the distribution of the stones suggests a sudden, violent event, such as an earthquake or a flood, that toppled the structures and scattered the blocks across the landscape. If such a catastrophic event occurred, it would have destroyed or disrupted the stratigraphic context that archaeologists rely on for dating, potentially making the site appear younger than it actually is. This is speculative, but it is not unreasonable. Catastrophic events do occur, and they can dramatically alter the archaeological record. The question of Tiwanaku's age remains open. The conventional dates are well supported by the available evidence, but they are not conclusive. The alternative dates proposed by researchers like Posnansky are intriguing but unproven, and the truth, as is so often the case in archaeology, may lie somewhere that we have not yet looked. One of the most striking aspects of Tiwanaku is the sophistication of its urban planning. This was not a random collection of temples and monuments scattered across the landscape. It was a planned city, with a deliberate layout, organized infrastructure, and a level of civic engineering that speaks to a complex, well-organized society. The city was organized around a central ceremonial core, which included the major structures we have already discussed: the Akapana Pyramid, the calisassia, the semi-subterranean temple, Pumapunku, and several other major buildings and platforms. This core was surrounded by residential areas, workshops, storage facilities, and agricultural zones that extended outward for a considerable distance. Estimates of the city's population vary widely. Some researchers have suggested a population of 20,000 to 40,000 at its peak. Others have proposed larger figures, up to 100,000 or more, depending on how broadly one defines the city's boundaries. Whatever the exact number, it is clear that Tiwanaku was one of the largest urban centers in the pre-Columbian world, rivaling contemporaneous cities in Mesoamerica and potentially exceeding them in some measures of engineering sophistication. The residential areas of Tiwanaku were built primarily of adobe, sun-dried mud bricks rather than stone. This is one reason why the residential areas have largely disappeared while the stone ceremonial core has survived. Adobe is a practical and effective building material, well suited to the climate of the Altiplano, but it degrades over time, especially in the presence of moisture and frost. After 1,000 years of exposure, the adobe buildings have melted back into the earth, leaving only faint traces that can be detected through careful excavation or remote sensing. The city had a water management system that was remarkably sophisticated. In addition to the drainage system within the Akapana pyramid, the city featured a network of canals, channels, and possibly even a sewer system that managed the flow of water through the urban area. Clean water was brought into the city through stone-lined channels, while wastewater and rainwater were carried away through separate channels. This kind of dual water management system, separating clean water from wastewater, is a hallmark of advanced urban planning that was not common in the ancient world. The agricultural system that supported Tiwanaku was equally impressive. The builders of Tiwanaku developed a technique known as raised field agriculture, or suka kalu in the Aymara language, which was brilliantly adapted to the harsh conditions of the Altiplano. This technique involved constructing elevated planting platforms separated by channels filled with water. The channels served multiple purposes. They captured and stored solar heat during the day, releasing it at night to protect the crops from frost. They provided irrigation during dry periods. They created a habitat for algae and aquatic plants that could be harvested and used as fertilizer. And they created a microclimate around the raised fields that moderated the extreme temperature swings of the Altiplano. Experimental reconstructions of the raised field system have demonstrated that it is remarkably effective. Yields on reconstructed raised fields have been shown to exceed those of modern conventional farming in the same area by a significant margin. The system is sustainable, self-fertilizing, and resilient to the harsh conditions of the high-altitude environment. It is, in short, a brilliant piece of agricultural engineering, perfectly adapted to its environment and far more sophisticated than simple subsistence farming. The extent of the raised field system associated with Tiwanaku is staggering. Aerial surveys and satellite imagery have revealed traces of ancient raised fields covering thousands of square miles around Lake Titicaca, far exceeding the area that would have been needed to feed the population of Tiwanaku alone. This suggests that Tiwanaku was the center of a vast agricultural network, producing surpluses that were used to support a large non-farming population, to fund monumental construction projects, and to trade with distant regions. The reach of Tiwanaku extended far beyond the Altiplano. Archaeological evidence shows that the Tiwanaku civilization maintained trade networks and cultural connections spanning a vast area, from the Pacific coast of present-day Chile and Peru to the tropical lowlands of the Amazon basin. Tiwanaku-style ceramics, textiles, and architectural features have been found at sites hundreds of miles from the capital, indicating either direct political control, strong cultural influence, or extensive trade relationships. The Tiwanaku civilization appears to have been particularly interested in establishing colonies or outposts in the coastal deserts to the west and the tropical valleys to the east, areas that produced resources not available on the Altiplano, such as marine products, coca leaves, tropical fruits, and various precious materials. One of the most significant Tiwanaku-associated sites outside the Altiplano is the site of Omo in the Moquegua Valley of southern Peru. Here, archaeologists have found extensive evidence of Tiwanaku colonial presence, including residential areas, ceremonial structures, and cemeteries containing Tiwanaku-style artifacts and burials. The Moquegua Valley is at a much lower elevation than the Altiplano, and its climate is warm and dry, supporting the cultivation of crops that could not be grown at high altitude. The presence of a Tiwanaku colony here suggests a deliberate strategy of ecological complementarity, establishing outposts in different ecological zones to secure access to a wide range of resources. This strategy, known as vertical archipelago or ecological complementarity, was later adopted and expanded by the Inca Empire, and it is one of the key pieces of evidence that the Inca built upon the foundations, both literal and figurative, of the Tiwanaku civilization. The Inca did not invent the concept of multi-ecological zone resource management. They inherited it from Tiwanaku. The trade goods that flowed through the Tiwanaku network were diverse and valuable. Obsidian, a volcanic glass used for making sharp cutting tools, came from sources in the highlands. Copper and tin, the components of bronze, came from mines in the mountains. Gold and silver, used for ornamental and ritual objects, came from various sources. Shells from the Pacific coast, feathers from the tropical lowlands, and precious stones from multiple regions all found their way to the capital city, where they were worked by skilled artisans into the elaborate artifacts that have been recovered by archaeologists. One of the most intriguing trade items associated with Tiwanaku is the psychoactive snuff derived from the seeds of the andesite tree, a tropical plant that does not grow on the altiplano. Tiwanaku-style snuff trays and tubes, elaborately carved from bone or wood and decorated with Tiwanaku iconography, have been found at sites across the southern Andes, and the presence of andesite seeds has been confirmed at Tiwanaku itself. The use of psychoactive substances in ritual contexts is well documented in Andean cultures, and there is strong evidence that the priests and leaders of Tiwanaku employed andesite snuff as part of their religious ceremonies. The snuff produces vivid hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, and a sense of communion with the supernatural, and it is likely that these experiences were central to Tiwanaku's religious practices. This raises an interesting possibility. Could the extraordinary artistic and architectural achievements of Tiwanaku be connected, in some way, to the altered states of consciousness produced by psychoactive substances? Some researchers have suggested that the complex, repetitive geometric patterns found in Tiwanaku art may be influenced by the visual phenomena experienced during psychoactive trances, such as the geometric hallucinations known as form constants that are produced by the visual cortex under the influence of certain substances. Whether this connection is causal or coincidental is impossible to determine, but it is a provocative idea that adds another layer to the mystery of Tiwanaku. The social organization of the Tiwanaku civilization is another area where our knowledge is limited but suggestive. Without written records, we must infer the social structure from the archaeological evidence, which includes the distribution of different types of housing, the contents of burials, the organization of workshops and storage facilities, and the iconography of art and architecture. The evidence suggests a highly stratified society, with a ruling elite who controlled the ceremonial core of the city, a class of skilled artisans and specialists who produced the fine crafts for which Tiwanaku is known, and a large population of farmers and laborers who worked the raised fields and construction projects that sustained the city. The ruling elite appear to have been closely associated with the religious institutions of the city, suggesting a theocratic form of government in which political and religious authority were intertwined. The monumental architecture of the ceremonial core, the akapana, the kalisasya, the semi-subterranean temple, served both political and religious functions, demonstrating the power of the elite to the populace and providing a stage for the elaborate ceremonies and rituals that reinforced the social order. Burials at Tiwanaku and its satellite sites reveal significant differences in wealth and status. Elite burials contain rich grave goods, including gold and silver ornaments, elaborately decorated ceramics, fine textiles, and ritual objects such as snuff trays and incense burners. Common burials are much simpler with few or no grave goods. This differential treatment in death reflects the social inequality that existed in life. There is also evidence of human sacrifice at Tiwanaku, though the extent and nature of the practice are debated. Some burials contain individuals who appear to have met violent deaths, and certain ritual contexts suggest that human offerings were made on important occasions. However, the evidence is not as extensive or as dramatic as that found at some Mesoamerican sites, and it is possible that human sacrifice at Tiwanaku was a relatively rare event reserved for exceptional circumstances rather than a routine practice. One of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of Tiwanaku is its relationship with the other great Andean civilization of the Middle Horizon period, the Wari Empire, which was based in the highlands of central Peru, roughly 600 miles to the northwest. The Wari and Tiwanaku civilizations were roughly contemporaneous, both flourishing between approximately the 6th and 11th centuries of the Common Era. They shared certain cultural features, including a common artistic style that featured the staff god and related iconographic elements. But they were also distinct in many ways, with different architectural styles, different settlement patterns, and apparently different political structures. The relationship between Wari and Tiwanaku is one of the great puzzles of Andean archaeology. Were they allies, rivals, independent developments from a common cultural ancestor? Did they interact directly or only indirectly through intermediary groups? The evidence is ambiguous. There are sites in southern Peru where both Wari and Tiwanaku artifacts have been found together, suggesting some form of interaction or overlap. But there are no clear signs of warfare between the two civilizations, and their respective territories appear to have been largely non-overlapping. Some researchers have proposed that Wari and Tiwanaku were two halves of a single cultural system, linked by shared religious beliefs and iconography, but maintaining separate political structures. Others have proposed that they were independent civilizations that developed similar cultural features through parallel evolution in similar environments. The truth may involve elements of both interpretations, and it is a question that ongoing research continues to explore. The collapse of the Tiwanaku civilization is another subject shrouded in uncertainty. Sometime around the 11th century of the Common Era, the city of Tiwanaku was abandoned, and the civilization that had flourished for over a millennium came to an end. But why? The most widely accepted explanation is environmental. Climate studies based on ice cores from the Cuelca ice cap in Peru, sediment cores from Lake Titicaca, and other paleoclimatic proxies have revealed that the period between approximately the 10th and 13th centuries was marked by a severe and prolonged drought in the Andes. Lake Titicaca fell to dramatically lower levels. The raised field system that was the agricultural backbone of the Tiwanaku economy became unworkable, and the food surpluses that had sustained the urban population and the monumental construction projects dried up, literally. Without food surpluses, the social and political structures that held the civilization together would have been unable to function. The elite would have lost their ability to redistribute resources and maintain the loyalty of the population. The specialists and artisans who had produced the fine crafts and managed the construction projects would have been forced to return to subsistence farming. The population would have dispersed, seeking more reliable food sources at lower elevations or in more favorable microclimates. This process of collapse was probably not sudden or dramatic. It was likely a slow, grinding decline, spread over decades or even centuries, as the drought deepened and the social fabric of the civilization unraveled. There is no evidence of a foreign invasion or a single catastrophic event. The city simply faded, its population dwindling, its buildings falling into disrepair, its fields returning to the wild grasses of the Altiplano. By the time the Inca Empire rose to power in the 15th century, Tiwanaku had been in ruins for hundreds of years. The Inca found the site awe-inspiring, but they found it empty. The builders were gone. Their descendants had scattered across the highlands, becoming the various Aymara-speaking communities that still inhabit the region today. The knowledge of how the great city had been built, how the stones had been cut and transported, how the calendar had been calculated, had been lost, or had it? There's a persistent and tantalizing suggestion in the historical and ethnographic record that some of the knowledge of the Tiwanaku builders survived the collapse, transmitted in fragmentary and perhaps distorted form through the oral traditions of the Aymara people and later absorbed into Inca culture. The Inca were famously skilled builders in their own right, constructing the magnificent stone cities of Cusco, Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, and Sacsayhuaman. Their stonemasonry, while different in style from Tiwanaku's, shares certain fundamental characteristics, including the precise fitting of stone blocks without mortar, the use of interlocking shapes to resist seismic forces, and an overall aesthetic that values smooth surfaces and clean lines. Did the Inca learn some of their building techniques from the legacy of Tiwanaku? It is certainly possible, though it is difficult to prove. The Inca themselves seem to have acknowledged a debt to the ancient builders of the Altiplano. When the Inca Emperor Pachacuti was planning the reconstruction of Cusco in the mid-15th century, he is said to have visited Tiwanaku and been so impressed by the ruins that he ordered his architects to study them and incorporate elements of the Tiwanaku style into the new Inca capital. Whether this account is historically accurate or a later embellishment is uncertain, but it reflects a cultural memory of Tiwanaku as a source of architectural wisdom, a place where the secrets of stone construction had been mastered at a level that even the mighty Inca sought to emulate. Let us return now to the Gate of the Sun and examine its carvings more closely, because there are details in those carvings that we have not yet fully explored. The central figure, the staff god, has been the focus of most scholarly attention, but the 48 attendant figures flanking the deity are equally interesting and perhaps even more important for understanding the cosmological and calendrical significance of the monument. These figures are arranged in 3 horizontal rows on each side of the central deity, for a total of 6 rows. Each row contains 8 figures, making 48 in all. The figures in the top and bottom rows have human faces. The figures in the middle row have condor faces. All of the figures are shown in profile, running toward the center, as if converging on the staff god. The number 48 is significant. In many ancient calendrical systems, the year was divided into periods that were multiples or factors of 48. If the Tiwanaku calendar used a system of 12 months with 4 weeks of 4 days each, that would give 48 periods within the year. Alternatively, if the year was divided into 12 months of 20 days each, with additional intercalary days, the number 48 could represent the number of weeks in a year using a 4-day-week cycle. Several researchers have attempted to decode the calendrical system of the Gate of the Sun, with varying results. One of the most detailed analyses was conducted by the engineer and independent researcher Edmund Kiss in the early 20th century. Kiss proposed that the Gate of the Sun calendar was based on a year of approximately 290 days, divided into 12 months of 24 days each, with a remaining period of approximately 2 days for intercalation. He argued that this calendar corresponded to a time when the Earth's orbital period was different from what it is today, a suggestion that is not supported by modern astronomy and has been largely dismissed. A more recent and more rigorous analysis was conducted by the archaeoastronomer Neil Steed, who proposed that the Gate of the Sun contains a sophisticated calendar tracking the movements of the Sun, Moon, and possibly Venus over a period of many years. Steed argued that the arrangement and details of the attendant figures encode information about lunar months, solar years, and the synodic periods of certain planets, information that could only have been accumulated through generations of sustained, precise astronomical observation. If Steed's analysis is correct, the Gate of the Sun is not merely a decorative monument. It is an astronomical encyclopedia, carved in stone, encoding centuries of observational data in a symbolic language that the builders expected to be readable by future generations. The sophistication of this encoding, if the interpretation is valid, implies a level of scientific understanding that is far beyond what is typically attributed to any pre-Columbian Andean civilization. But there is a deeper and more troubling implication. Some of the astronomical data encoded in the gate of the sun, according to certain interpretations, appears to reference celestial phenomena that were not known to modern science until relatively recently. These include subtle variations in the Earth's axial tilt, changes in the obliquity of the ecliptic, and possibly even precession-related phenomena that play out over cycles of thousands of years. If the builders of Tiwanaku were aware of these phenomena, it would imply an astronomical tradition of extraordinary depth and duration, one that extended back thousands of years before the conventional date of the Gate of the Sun's construction. This is one of the lines of evidence that supporters of an older date for Tiwanaku point to. How could a civilization that was only a few centuries old have accumulated enough observational data to track phenomena that play out over millennia? One possible answer is that the Tiwanaku civilization inherited its astronomical knowledge from an even older tradition, one that predated the construction of the monuments we see today. This idea is consistent with the mythology of the region, which consistently refers to an earlier age of wisdom that preceded the current era. It is also consistent with the archaeological evidence, which shows that the Tiwanaku site was occupied for a very long period, with the earliest phases of habitation predating the monumental construction by many centuries. Could there have been an earlier civilization at or near the site of Tiwanaku that accumulated the astronomical knowledge later, encoded in the Gate of the Sun? Could the builders of the gate have been the inheritors rather than the originators of this knowledge? These are questions that cannot be answered with certainty, but they are questions worth asking. The enigma of Tiwanaku has attracted the attention of scholars, explorers, and adventurers for centuries. The first Europeans to visit the site were Spanish conquistadors and missionaries in the 16th century, and their accounts, while often colored by their own cultural assumptions and religious preconceptions, provide valuable descriptions of the ruins as they appeared nearly 500 years ago. The chronicler Pedro Cieza de Leon visited Tiwanaku in 1549 and described it in his account of the conquest of Peru. He wrote of enormous stone buildings that seemed impossibly ancient, and he recorded the local legends that attributed the construction to a race of giants from a bygone era. He described the Gate of the Sun, though he did not use that name, and he marveled at the precision of the stonework, noting that the blocks were fitted together so perfectly that it was impossible to see how they had been joined. Cieza de Leon also noted something that would prove prophetic. He observed that many of the stones at Tiwanaku had already been removed by local people for use in other construction projects, and he expressed concern that the site was being gradually destroyed. This process of destruction would continue for centuries, as stones from Tiwanaku were used to build churches, houses, bridges, and even a railroad bed, slowly dismantling one of the most extraordinary achievements of the ancient world. Another early visitor was the Jesuit missionary Bernabe Kobo, who visited Tiwanaku in the early 17th century. Kobo described the ruins in considerable detail, noting the enormous size of the stone blocks, the precision of the carving, and the complexity of the layout. He also recorded the local traditions about the site, including the legend that it had been built overnight by supernatural beings, a legend that reflects the same sense of awe and incomprehension that the site inspires to this day. The first serious archaeological investigation of Tiwanaku was undertaken by the French naturalist Alcide d'Orbigny, who visited the site in the 1830s and produced detailed drawings and measurements of the major structures. D'Orbigny was impressed by the scale and sophistication of the ruins, and he was among the first to suggest that Tiwanaku might be older than the Inca civilization, a view that was considered radical at the time but is now universally accepted. But it was Arthur Posnansky, the Bolivian archaeologist of Austrian descent whom we have already mentioned, who dedicated the most sustained and passionate effort to understanding Tiwanaku. Beginning in the 1890s and continuing until his death in 1946, Posnanski spent nearly half a century studying the site, conducting surveys, taking measurements, excavating structures, and developing his controversial theories about the extreme antiquity of the ruins. Posnanski was a controversial figure. He was not a trained archaeologist in the modern sense, and his methods did not always conform to the standards of academic rigor that were emerging during his lifetime. He was passionate, opinionated, and sometimes combative in his defense of his theories. But he was also deeply knowledgeable about the site, and his detailed records and photographs have proven invaluable to later researchers, particularly given the extensive damage and alteration the site has undergone since his time. Posnanski's most controversial claim was his dating of the Calissacia to approximately 15,000 years before the Common Era, based on his analysis of the astronomical alignments of the structure. As we have discussed, this dating has been rejected by most mainstream archaeologists, but it has not been conclusively disproven, and it continues to be debated by researchers on both sides of the issue. Regardless of whether Posnanski's extreme dating is correct, his work established Tiwanaku as a site of global significance and drew international attention to the mysteries of the ruins. Without his decades of dedicated study, much of what we know about Tiwanaku today would have been lost to the ongoing destruction of the site. In the mid-20th century, a new generation of archaeologists began working at Tiwanaku, employing more rigorous methods and new technologies. Among the most important of these was Carlos Ponce Sanguinés, a Bolivian archaeologist who directed excavations at the site from the 1950s through the 1980s, and who is responsible for much of the reconstruction and restoration work visible at the site today. Ponce Sanguinés' work was significant for several reasons. He established a detailed chronological framework for the site, dividing the Tiwanaku occupation into 5 main phases, from the earliest village occupation to the final collapse. He conducted extensive excavations of the Calissacia, the semi-subterranean temple, and other major structures, recovering a wealth of artifacts and architectural details. And he oversaw the partial reconstruction of the Calissacia and the semi-subterranean temple, restoring some of the standing stones and walls to approximately their original positions. However, Ponce Sanguinés' reconstruction work has been criticized by some later researchers, who argue that it was based on incomplete evidence and may not accurately reflect the original layout of the structures. The repositioning of standing stones and the reconstruction of walls, while well-intentioned, may have introduced errors that make it difficult to assess the original astronomical alignments and architectural relationships. This is a common problem at reconstructed archaeological sites, and it adds another layer of uncertainty to the already challenging task of interpreting Tiwanaku. More recent work at the site has employed cutting-edge technologies including ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, LIDAR remote sensing, and advanced chemical analysis of artifacts and materials. These technologies have revealed previously unknown structures buried beneath the surface, including what appears to be a large, previously unrecognized platform or building complex adjacent to the Akapana Pyramid. They have also provided new data on the extent of the raised field system, the layout of the residential areas, and the material composition of the stone blocks and metal objects. One particularly exciting recent discovery was the identification of a possible underwater structure in Lake Titicaca, near the Island of the Sun, that may be associated with the Tiwanaku civilization. Underwater archaeologists have explored submerged ruins in the lake on several occasions, recovering artifacts and identifying stone structures that are now below the waterline. These discoveries support the hypothesis that the lake level was once different from what it is today, and they raise the tantalizing possibility that significant Tiwanaku-era structures remain hidden beneath the waters of the lake, waiting to be explored. As we approach the midpoint of our exploration, let us step back and consider the broader significance of Tiwanaku in the context of human civilization. Tiwanaku is not just another archaeological site, it is a challenge to our understanding of what ancient peoples were capable of. The precision of its stonework, the sophistication of its astronomical knowledge, the scale of its construction, and the harshness of its environment all combine to create a picture that does not fit neatly into the standard narrative of human cultural development. According to the standard narrative, civilization developed gradually, progressing from simple hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural villages to complex urban centers over the course of thousands of years. Technological capabilities advanced in a similar step-by-step fashion, with each generation building on the achievements of the last. Societies developed independently in different parts of the world, with similar challenges producing similar solutions, and the level of achievement at any given time and place was roughly proportional to the size, age, and resource base of the society in question. Tiwanaku challenges this narrative in several ways. First, the level of engineering achievement at Tiwanaku appears to be disproportionate to the society's known technological toolkit. The builders are thought to have worked with stone and bronze tools, yet they achieved results that would be difficult to replicate with modern industrial equipment. This disproportion does not necessarily imply the existence of unknown technologies, but it does demand an explanation, and the explanations offered so far have been less than fully satisfying. Second, the astronomical knowledge encoded at the site appears to be disproportionate to the age of the civilization, if the conventional dates are accepted. Tracking subtle changes in the Earth's axial tilt requires centuries of precise observation, and the conventional chronology does not provide enough time for this knowledge to have been accumulated from scratch. This suggests either that the builders inherited their astronomical knowledge from an older tradition, or that the conventional dates are wrong. Third, the location of the city at 13,000 feet in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth is difficult to explain in purely practical terms. There were easier, more hospitable places to build a city. There were locations with better soil, milder climates, more abundant resources, and easier access to water. Why did the builders of Tiwanaku choose this spot? What drew them to the roof of the world? One possible answer is that the location was chosen for its proximity to Lake Titicaca, which held deep spiritual significance for the peoples of the Andes. The lake was regarded as the birthplace of the world, the source of creation, the navel of the earth. Building a great city near the sacred lake would have been an act of religious devotion and political legitimacy, connecting the rulers of Tiwanaku to the cosmic order and the divine powers that sustained it. Another possible answer is that the altitude itself was significant. At 13,000 feet, the sky is closer, the stars are brighter, and the conditions for astronomical observation are exceptional. If the builders of Tiwanaku were deeply invested in understanding the heavens, they may have chosen their location precisely because it offered the best possible vantage point for watching the sky. A third possibility, one that is more speculative but no less interesting, is that the location was chosen because it was already sacred, already special, already marked in some way by an earlier presence or an earlier tradition. If an older civilization or an older sacred site existed at or near the location of Tiwanaku, the later builders may have been drawn to the spot by the legacy of what had come before. There are still other mysteries at Tiwanaku that we have not yet touched upon, and they deserve our attention before we pause to reflect on everything we have encountered. One such mystery is the question of the stone's origin and composition. While we know that the red sandstone came from quarries approximately 6 miles away, and the andesite came from the Copacabana Peninsula some 56 miles distant, there are blocks at the site that do not match any known local quarry. These orphan blocks, as they have been called by some researchers, are made of stone types that cannot be traced to any identified source within the expected range. This is not entirely unusual. At many ancient sites, some building materials were imported from distant sources for reasons that are not immediately obvious, perhaps because the specific type of stone was considered sacred, or because it had particular working properties that made it desirable for a specific purpose. But the presence of stone types at Tiwanaku that cannot be sourced locally adds yet another dimension to the transportation mystery. If some of the stones came from even greater distances than the 56 miles that separate the site from the known andesite quarries, the logistical challenges of construction become even more formidable. Another mystery involves the metalwork found at the site. The bronze and copper arsenic nickel alloy clamps used to fasten stone blocks together at Tiwanaku have already been mentioned. But analysis of these clamps has revealed a curious detail. The alloy composition is not uniform. Different clamps have slightly different ratios of copper, arsenic, and nickel, suggesting that they were not all produced from a single batch of metal but were manufactured individually, possibly at different times or by different craftspeople. What is remarkable is that despite these variations in composition, the clamps are all functionally effective. The builders understood the metallurgical principles involved and were able to adjust their recipes while maintaining the essential properties of the alloy. This implies a level of metallurgical sophistication that goes beyond simple trial and error. It suggests a genuine understanding of the relationship between composition and performance, a kind of empirical materials science that is impressive by any standard. Further analysis has shown that the metal was poured into the stone clamp channels in a molten state, using portable smelters or furnaces that could produce temperatures high enough to melt copper alloys, approximately 1100 degrees Celsius or 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. At 13,000 feet, where the air is thin and fires burn less efficiently due to the reduced oxygen, achieving and maintaining these temperatures would have been a significant technical challenge. The builders must have developed specialized furnace designs, possibly using forced air systems such as bellows or blow tubes, to compensate for the reduced atmospheric pressure. Archaeological evidence supports this interpretation. Fragments of ceramic blow tubes and possible furnace components have been found at and near the site, and experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that it is possible to achieve the necessary temperatures at high altitude using traditional forced air techniques. But once again, the sophistication of the achievement is noteworthy. These were not people fumbling in the dark. They were skilled metallurgists solving complex technical problems with ingenuity and precision. There's one final mystery that we must address before we bring this first part of our exploration to a close, and it is perhaps the deepest mystery of all. What happened to the knowledge? The builders of Tiwanaku possessed extraordinary skills. They could cut the hardest stones with remarkable precision. They could track the movements of the heavens with accuracy that rivaled modern instruments. They could engineer massive structures that survived for millennia. They could produce metal alloys of specific compositions for specific purposes. They could design and implement agricultural systems of extraordinary efficiency. They could plan and manage a city of tens of thousands of people in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And then, over the course of a few generations, all of this knowledge was lost. When the Inca arrived at Tiwanaku centuries later, they found ruins. They did not find the builders or their descendants or anyone who remembered how the city had been constructed. The knowledge was gone as completely as if it had never existed. The Aymara people who lived in the region retained legends and myths about the ancient builders, but they did not retain the technical knowledge. The precision stone-cutting, the astronomical science, the metallurgical expertise, all of it had vanished. This is one of the most troubling aspects of the Tiwanaku mystery. We tend to assume that knowledge, once acquired, is retained and built upon by successive generations. This is the story of progress that underlies our understanding of civilization. But Tiwanaku tells a different story. It tells us that extraordinary knowledge can be gained and then lost, that sophisticated civilizations can rise and then fall, leaving behind stones that their successors cannot explain. Is this what happened at Tiwanaku? Was there truly a loss of knowledge so complete that the descendants of the builders could not even remember how the stones were cut? Or is there something else going on, something we have not yet considered? Some researchers have suggested that the knowledge was not lost but deliberately concealed, hidden away by the final generation of priests or specialists in a form that has not yet been discovered. Perhaps it was encoded in the stones themselves, in the geometric patterns and symbolic carvings that cover the monuments of Tiwanaku, waiting for someone with the right key to unlock it. Perhaps it was preserved in oral traditions that have been distorted beyond recognition by centuries of transmission. Perhaps it was recorded in a medium that has not survived, such as knotted strings, painted textiles, or carved wooden tablets. The Inca who came later used a system of knotted strings called quipu to record information, including numerical data, narrative accounts, and possibly even something approaching written language. Was the quipu system inherited from Tiwanaku? Could there have been a Tiwanaku equivalent, a recording system that preserved their knowledge in a form we have not yet recognized? These are questions that tantalize without providing answers. What we can say with certainty is that Tiwanaku represents a peak of human achievement that was followed by a valley of forgetting. The stones remain, but the knowledge that created them has been lost, and in that loss there is a lesson and a warning. Civilization is fragile. Knowledge is not permanent. What one generation builds, a later generation may not be able to maintain, let alone replicate. The stones of Tiwanaku stand as silent testimony to a greatness that was, and that was lost, and that may yet be recovered if we have the wisdom and the patience to listen to what they have to tell us. As we pause in our exploration, let us take stock of what we have learned so far. We have traveled to the altiplano of Bolivia, one of the highest and harshest inhabited landscapes on Earth. We have walked among the ruins of a city that at its peak was one of the most remarkable urban centers in the ancient world. We have examined the Gate of the Sun, with its extraordinary astronomical calendar and its enigmatic deity. We have explored the Calisasya, a monumental astronomical observatory aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. We have stood before the massive ruins of the Akapana Pyramid with its sophisticated internal drainage system. We have marveled at the impossible precision of the stonework at Puma Punku, where the hardest volcanic stone was cut, drilled, and polished with accuracy that rivals modern industrial standards. We have considered the mystery of transportation, the challenge of moving 100-ton stone blocks across miles of rough terrain at an altitude where every breath is a struggle. We have examined the agricultural system that sustained the city, the trade networks that connected it to distant regions, and the religious iconography that expressed its worldview. We have explored the question of age, the controversy over whether Tiwanaku is a few hundred years old or many thousands of years old, and we have found that the question remains unresolved. We have heard the legends of giants and gods, the accounts of Spanish chroniclers and modern archaeologists, and the theories of mainstream and alternative researchers. And through it all, we have encountered a single, persistent, unyielding mystery. How was this possible? How did a civilization at 13,000 feet, with tools of stone and bronze, achieve things that we, with all our modern technology and knowledge, cannot fully explain? In the second part of our exploration, we will delve even deeper into the mysteries of Tiwanaku. We will examine the most provocative theories about who built the city and why, including the possibility that Tiwanaku is connected to a lost global civilization whose existence has been erased from the historical record. We will explore the latest scientific discoveries at the site, including new findings that are challenging the conventional chronology and opening up new lines of inquiry. We will consider the connections between Tiwanaku and other mysterious ancient sites around the world, from the pyramids of Egypt to the megaliths of the Pacific Islands, and we will ask whether these connections are coincidental or evidence of a shared heritage that has been forgotten. We will examine the underwater ruins of Lake Titicaca, the ongoing debate about the site's extreme antiquity, and the remarkable possibility that Tiwanaku holds the key to understanding a chapter of human history that has been lost for thousands of years. The stones are waiting, the mystery endures, and there is much more to discover. Stay with us. The ruins have not finished speaking. In the first part of our journey, we walked among the shattered remnants of a civilization that should not exist. We stood before the gate of the sun and traced the carvings of a calendar that tracks the heavens with impossible accuracy. We examined the precision-cut stones of Puma Punku, blocks of volcanic andesite shaped with tolerances that would humble a modern machine shop. We grappled with the mystery of how 100-ton stones were transported across miles of punishing terrain at an altitude where the very air conspires against human effort, but we have only scratched the surface. Beneath the windswept plateau, beneath the scattered rubble and the sun-bleached grass, beneath the layers of soil deposited by millennia of wind and rain, there are secrets that are only now beginning to reveal themselves. New technologies, new discoveries, and new ways of thinking are opening doors that have been closed for thousands of years. And what lies behind those doors is challenging everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. In this second part of our exploration, we are going deeper. We are going to examine the most provocative theories about Tiwanaku, the ones that mainstream archaeology has been reluctant to engage with, and the ones that new evidence is making increasingly difficult to ignore. We are going to explore the underwater ruins of Lake Titicaca, the genetic mysteries of the Altiplano's ancient inhabitants, the acoustic and energetic properties of the monuments, and the startling connections between Tiwanaku and other mysterious ancient sites scattered across the globe. We are going to ask the questions that polite academia prefers to avoid, and we are going to see where the evidence leads, even if it leads to places that are deeply uncomfortable. Let us begin with the question that has haunted every visitor to Tiwanaku since the first Spanish conquistadors stood among the ruins and asked the local people who had built this place. The answer they received was consistent, repeated by multiple indigenous communities across the region, and recorded by multiple independent chroniclers. The people of the Altiplano said that Tiwanaku had been built by a race of giants in the time before the sun. They said that these giants had been created by the god Viracocha, that they had possessed extraordinary powers and knowledge, and that they had been destroyed by a great catastrophe, a flood that covered the earth, after which Viracocha created a new race of humans, smaller and weaker, to inhabit the world. The Spanish chroniclers, shaped by their own biblical framework, heard echoes of the Genesis flood narrative in these stories and tended to interpret them through that lens. But the legends themselves are far older than any European influence, and they contain details that are specific to the Andean context and that resonate with the physical evidence at the site. The legend of the giants deserves more careful examination than it typically receives. When the indigenous peoples of the Altiplano spoke of giants, they may not have been speaking literally. The word giant in many ancient traditions is used to describe beings who are not necessarily physically larger than ordinary humans, but who are greater in power, knowledge, or capability. The Hebrew word Nephilim, often translated as giants, has been interpreted by some scholars as meaning the fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall, a description of power and impact rather than physical stature. Similarly, the Andean concept of giants may refer to beings who were giant in their achievements, in their ability to move mountains, to cut stone like butter, to read the stars like an open book. If we interpret the legend in this way, it becomes less a fairy tale and more a historical memory, encoded in mythological language, of a people whose capabilities far exceeded those of the societies that came after them. A people who built things that their successors could not replicate or even comprehend. A people whose knowledge was so far beyond the ordinary that it could only be explained, in the vocabulary available to later generations, as the work of supernatural beings. This interpretation is consistent with a pattern found in cultures around the world. When a later people encounters the ruins of an earlier, more advanced civilization, they almost invariably attribute those ruins to gods, giants, or supernatural beings. This is not because the earlier people were actually supernatural, but because the later people have no other framework for explaining achievements that exceed their own capabilities. The Inca, as we noted in Part 1, attributed Tiwanaku to giants. They did not claim it as their own work. They looked at the stones and said, truthfully, that they did not know how such things could have been done. And the Inca were themselves master builders, engineers of the highest caliber, creators of Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman and the vast road network that connected their empire. If the Inca were impressed by Tiwanaku, we should pay attention. The legend of Viracocha, the creator god associated with Tiwanaku, contains elements that are both fascinating and deeply puzzling. According to the most detailed versions of the legend, recorded by Spanish chroniclers such as Juan de Betanzos, Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, and Cristobal de Molina, Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca at the beginning of time. He created the sun, the moon, and the stars. He fashioned the first race of humans from stone, making them as giants, but these giants displeased him, and he destroyed them with a great flood. After the flood, he created a second race of humans, normal-sized from smaller stones, and he brought them to life at Tiwanaku. Viracocha then traveled across the land, teaching the new humans the arts of civilization. He taught them agriculture, medicine, engineering, and astronomy. He gave them laws and customs. He established cities and kingdoms. And when his work was done, he walked across the ocean to the west, departing the world with a promise that he or his emissaries would one day return. The physical description of Viracocha, as recorded in the chronicles, is remarkable. He is consistently described as tall, with fair skin, a long beard, and flowing robes. He carried a staff and wore sandals. His appearance was so different from the indigenous peoples of the Andes that when the Spanish conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, some indigenous communities initially mistook them for the returning emissaries of Viracocha, a tragic misidentification that the Spanish ruthlessly exploited. Now, let us be very careful here. The description of Viracocha as fair-skinned and bearded has been used by various groups, including some with deeply problematic racial agendas, to argue that Andean civilization was founded by Europeans or by some other non-indigenous group. This interpretation is not supported by the archaeological evidence, which clearly shows that the Tiwanaku civilization was built by the indigenous peoples of the Andes. The physical remains recovered from Tiwanaku and its associated sites are consistently those of indigenous Andean peoples, and there is no credible evidence of a European or other non-local founding population. However, the description of Viracocha does raise interesting questions. It is possible that the physical details are later additions, influenced by post-contact interaction with the Spanish. Myths are not static. They evolve and change as they are transmitted from generation to generation, and the introduction of Europeans into the Andean world may have prompted the addition of European-like physical features to an originally indigenous deity. Alternatively, the description of Viracocha as physically distinctive may reflect a genuine memory of an individual or a group of individuals who were, in some way, physically different from the general population. This could mean anything from a person with an unusual genetic condition that produced lighter skin or facial hair to a traveler from a distant region who brought new knowledge and technologies to the Andes. What is most significant about the Viracocha legend is not the physical description but the function of the deity. Viracocha is a civilizing god, a bringer of knowledge. He arrives in a world of chaos and darkness and brings order, light, and learning. He teaches the people how to farm, how to build, how to observe the stars. And then he leaves, his work done, his knowledge planted in the soil of human culture like a seed that will grow for generations. This motif, the civilizing deity or culture hero who arrives from elsewhere, teaches the arts of civilization, and then departs, is one of the most widespread and persistent themes in world mythology. It appears in Mesopotamia with the figure of Ons, a fish-like being who emerged from the sea and taught the Sumerians writing, mathematics, and agriculture. It appears in Egypt with the god Thoth, the ibis-headed deity of wisdom who gave humanity writing, science, and magic. It appears in Mesoamerica with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who taught the Toltecs and Aztecs the arts of civilization before departing across the Eastern Sea. The parallels between Viracocha and these other culture heroes are so striking that they demand explanation. Are they evidence of a shared source, a common origin for these myths in some historical reality? Or are they simply expressions of a universal human psychological pattern, a tendency to imagine that the knowledge that distinguishes us from animals must have come from somewhere outside ourselves? Both explanations are possible, and the truth may involve elements of both. But the consistency of the pattern across cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years is remarkable, and it suggests that these myths are more than just stories. They are memories, however distorted, of something that actually happened, some event or process by which knowledge was transmitted from one group of humans to another in the remote past. This brings us to one of the most controversial theories about Tiwanaku, the theory that it is a remnant of a lost global civilization, a civilization that flourished in the deep past before the end of the last ice age, and that was destroyed by catastrophic events around 12,000 years ago. This theory has been proposed in various forms by a number of independent researchers, most notably Graham Hancock, whose books have brought the idea to a global audience. The core argument is as follows. Mainstream archaeology holds that civilization began approximately 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, with the emergence of the first complex societies in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. Before that, according to the standard narrative, all humans lived as hunter-gatherers, with no permanent settlements, no monumental architecture, no writing, and no advanced technologies. But there are anomalies, sites, and artifacts that do not fit this narrative. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its elaborately carved stone pillars dating to approximately 10,000 years before the Common Era, demonstrated that monumental architecture existed thousands of years before the supposed beginning of civilization. The Sphinx in Egypt, with its evidence of water erosion that some geologists have argued indicates a much greater age than traditionally assigned, suggests that sophisticated construction was taking place in Egypt long before the Old Kingdom pharaohs. And Tiwanaku, with its precision stonework, its advanced astronomical knowledge, and its contested but potentially extreme antiquity, fits into this pattern. If Posnansky's dating of the Calisasia to 15,000 years before the Common Era is even approximately correct, Tiwanaku would be contemporary with the last ice age, a period when, according to mainstream archaeology, no civilization capable of such achievements should have existed. The theory proposes that a sophisticated civilization, possibly global in extent, existed during the Ice Age and was largely destroyed by the catastrophic events that accompanied the end of that period, approximately 11,600 years ago. These events, which include massive flooding caused by rapidly melting ice sheets, possible comet impacts, dramatic sea level rise, and widespread volcanic activity, would have devastated coastal and low-lying settlements around the world, wiping out the infrastructure and population centers of this earlier civilization. The survivors, according to this theory, scattered across the globe, carrying fragments of their knowledge with them. They became the culture heroes of later myths, the Viracachas and Ons and Quetzalcoatls, the civilizing deities who arrived in the aftermath of the catastrophe and taught the surviving human populations the arts of civilization. The knowledge they brought was the seed from which later civilizations grew, explaining the apparently sudden appearance of complex societies in multiple locations around the world within a few thousand years of the catastrophe. Tiwanaku in this framework is not just an ancient city. It is a remnant of the older civilization, a site that was established before the catastrophe and that survived in some form into the post-catastrophe era. Its extreme altitude, far above the flooding and sea level rise that devastated lower-lying areas, may have been its salvation. While coastal civilizations were being swallowed by rising seas, the city on the roof of the world endured. This theory is controversial, to say the least. It is rejected by the majority of mainstream archaeologists who argue that the evidence for a pre-Ice Age global civilization is insufficient, that the anomalous sites and artifacts can be explained within the existing framework, and that the theory relies too heavily on speculation and too little on hard evidence. These criticisms have merit. The theory does involve a significant amount of extrapolation from limited evidence, and it requires accepting interpretations of the data that are not universally supported. But it is also worth noting that the mainstream position has its own weaknesses. The conventional explanation for the origin of civilization, the idea that complex societies appeared independently in multiple locations within a few thousand years, purely as a result of local developments, has always been somewhat unsatisfying. The speed with which apparently advanced capabilities emerged in places like Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, without clear local antecedents in some cases, is difficult to explain without invoking some form of knowledge transfer. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe, which was a profound shock to mainstream archaeology, demonstrated that the conventional timeline was too short and that humans were capable of monumental construction far earlier than previously believed. If our timeline was wrong about Göbekli Tepe, is it possible that it is also wrong about Tiwanaku? The honest answer is that we do not know. But the question is legitimate, and the evidence from Tiwanaku is part of what makes it legitimate. Let us now turn to one of the most exciting areas of ongoing research at Tiwanaku, the exploration of what lies beneath Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca, as we discussed in Part 1, is the highest navigable lake in the world, a vast body of water sitting at over 12,500 feet above sea level. The lake is ancient, formed millions of years ago by tectonic activity and glacial processes, and its level has fluctuated significantly over the millennia in response to changes in climate and hydrology. In the year 2000, a team of international divers conducting an underwater archaeological survey near the Island of the Sun, approximately 60 miles from the main Tiwanaku site, discovered the remains of a large stone structure submerged beneath approximately 30 to 40 feet of water. The structure included a long wall, a terrace, and what appeared to be a paved road or processional way. Associated with the structure were numerous artifacts, including ceramic vessels, stone objects, and offerings of gold and other precious materials. The discovery was significant for several reasons. First, the sheer size and sophistication of the submerged structure suggested that it was not a minor or peripheral feature, but a substantial architectural complex, possibly a temple or ceremonial center. Second, the depth of the structure beneath the current lake surface indicated that it was built during a period when the lake level was significantly lower than it is today, or that the structure had subsided due to geological processes. Third, the artifacts associated with the structure included items that were stylistically consistent with the Tiwanaku tradition, suggesting a direct connection to the civilization. Subsequent expeditions have identified additional submerged features in the lake, including what appear to be walls, platforms, and other architectural elements at various depths and locations. Some of these features are near known archaeological sites on the lake's islands and shores, while others are in areas where no above-water ruins exist. The implications of these underwater discoveries are profound. If substantial Tiwanaku-era structures now lie beneath the waters of Lake Titicaca, it means that the lake level was once significantly lower than it is today, and that the civilization built structures on land that has since been flooded. This is consistent with the geological evidence, which shows that Lake Titicaca has experienced dramatic fluctuations in level over the millennia, with periods of much lower water interspersed with periods of much higher water. But there is a more radical interpretation. Some researchers have suggested that the submerged structures may predate the conventional Tiwanaku period and that they may be remnants of an earlier phase of construction that was inundated by rising lake levels thousands of years ago. If the structures were built during a period of particularly low lake level, and if that period corresponds to a time earlier than the conventional date range for Tiwanaku, the underwater ruins could be evidence for the extreme antiquity of the site. This interpretation is speculative and remains to be tested by rigorous dating of the underwater materials. But the discoveries have opened a new frontier in Tiwanaku research, one that has the potential to dramatically alter our understanding of the site's history. The exploration of Lake Titicaca's underwater heritage is still in its early stages. The lake is vast, cold, and deep, and underwater archaeology at 12,500 feet above sea level presents unique challenges, including the effects of altitude on divers' physiology and the limited visibility in the lake's often turbid waters. But the potential rewards are enormous. If there are substantial ruins beneath the lake, they may be better preserved than the above-water ruins, which have been subjected to centuries of human destruction. They may contain artifacts and materials that have been protected by the water from decay and looting, and they may hold clues to the earliest phases of the civilization's history that are not available on land. Imagine the possibility. An entire temple complex sealed beneath the waters of Lake Titicaca, preserved in a state that is closer to its original condition than anything visible on the surface. It is not a certainty, but it is a possibility, and it is a possibility that is driving ongoing research and exploration. Let us now consider another aspect of Tiwanaku that has received increasing attention in recent years: the question of the builder's physical characteristics and genetic heritage. The ancient inhabitants of the Altiplano were not identical to the people who live there today. While there is clear genetic continuity between the ancient and modern populations, indicating that the modern Aymara and Quechua peoples are indeed descendants of the Tiwanaku civilization, there are also indications of greater genetic diversity in the ancient population than in the modern one. Studies of ancient skeletal remains from Tiwanaku and its associated sites have revealed a range of physical characteristics that suggest the presence of individuals from different ethnic or regional backgrounds. Cranial measurements, dental characteristics, and bone morphology all show greater variability in the ancient population than in the modern Aymara population of the same region. This is consistent with the idea that Tiwanaku, as a major urban and religious center, attracted people from a wide area, including some who may have come from quite distant regions. One of the most striking physical features found in Tiwanaku-era remains is cranial deformation. Many of the skulls recovered from the site show evidence of deliberate artificial cranial modification, a practice in which the heads of infants were bound or compressed during the period of skull growth, producing dramatically elongated or flattened skull shapes in the adult. Cranial deformation is not unique to Tiwanaku. It is found in cultures around the world, from ancient Egypt to pre-Columbian Mesoamerica to the Pacific Islands. The practice typically served as a marker of social status, ethnic identity, or religious affiliation, and it was carried out through the application of boards, wrappings, or other binding devices to the heads of infants over a period of months or years. At Tiwanaku, cranial deformation appears to have been widespread among the elite, and the specific styles of deformation may have served to distinguish different social groups or lineages. Some skulls show extreme elongation, producing a head shape that is dramatically different from the natural human form. Others show more moderate modifications, producing a flattened or broadened skull. The prevalence of cranial deformation at Tiwanaku has given rise to considerable speculation. Some alternative researchers have suggested that the practice was intended to imitate the naturally elongated skull shape of a revered group of beings, perhaps the giants or gods of legend, who had naturally different cranial proportions. In this interpretation, the deformation was not arbitrary, but was a deliberate attempt to replicate the appearance of a specific model, a model that may have been based on actual individuals whose natural skull shape was different from the local population. This interpretation is highly speculative and is not supported by mainstream anthropologists, who point out that artificial cranial deformation can be fully explained as a cultural practice without invoking non-human or extra-local models. The practice is well documented in living cultures and is understood to be a form of body modification analogous to tattooing, scarification, or other practices that alter the body's appearance for cultural reasons. However, it is worth noting that the elongated skulls found at Tiwanaku and nearby Paracas on the coast of Peru include some specimens that are genuinely unusual. The Paracas skulls, in particular, have been the subject of considerable controversy, with some researchers claiming that certain specimens show cranial volumes significantly larger than the normal human range, suggesting that the elongation cannot be fully explained by artificial deformation alone. DNA analysis of some Paracas specimens has shown unusual genetic markers, though the interpretation of these results is disputed. The relationship between the Paracas skulls and Tiwanaku is not fully established, but the two sites share a broad geographic and temporal context, and there are stylistic similarities in the artifacts found at both locations. If there is a connection, it may provide clues about the genetic diversity and physical characteristics of the ancient populations of the Andes. Another area of growing research interest is the acoustic and energetic properties of the monuments at Tiwanaku. In recent years, researchers have begun to investigate the possibility that ancient megalithic structures were designed not only for visual impact and structural function, but also for acoustic performance. Studies at sites such as Stonehenge, the Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta, and various Egyptian temples have demonstrated that many ancient structures possess remarkable acoustic properties, including the ability to amplify, direct, or modify sound in ways that suggest deliberate design rather than accident. At Tiwanaku, preliminary acoustic studies have suggested that some of the structures may have been designed to create specific acoustic effects. The semi-subterranean temple, with its sunken design and stone-lined walls, functions as a natural amphitheater, amplifying and focusing sound in a way that would have been effective for ceremonial purposes. A voice speaking at a normal volume in the center of the sunken courtyard can be heard clearly at the edges, while sounds from outside the courtyard are attenuated. This suggests that the temple was designed as a space for ritual performance, where the words of priests or the sounds of instruments would have been enhanced by the architecture itself. The Akapana pyramid, with its internal drainage channels, may also have had acoustic properties. Some researchers have suggested that water flowing through the channels would have produced sounds that were audible on the exterior of the pyramid, creating an effect in which the pyramid itself seemed to be alive with the voice of water. If the channels were designed with specific geometries, they could have produced resonant frequencies that would have been experienced as a deep, vibrating hum, a sound that would have been felt in the body as much as heard by the ears. These acoustic interpretations are still in the early stages of investigation, and they remain somewhat speculative. But they are consistent with a broader pattern of acoustic sophistication in ancient architecture, and they offer an intriguing perspective on the function and purpose of Tiwanaku's monuments. If the buildings were designed to produce specific sounds and vibrations, then they were not merely temples or observatories. They were instruments, devices for creating specific sensory experiences that were integral to the religious and ceremonial life of the city. The idea that ancient builders understood and manipulated acoustics is no longer controversial in mainstream archaeology. The evidence from multiple sites around the world is now strong enough to be accepted as credible by most researchers. What remains debated is the degree of sophistication involved and whether the acoustic properties were primary design features or incidental byproducts of structural choices made for other reasons. At Tiwanaku, the answer may lie in the details of the architecture that have not yet been fully studied. Much of the site remains unexcavated, and the structures that have been exposed have been damaged and altered to the point where their original acoustic properties may be difficult to determine. But as new technologies and methods become available, the acoustic dimension of Tiwanaku's architecture is likely to receive increasing attention. The question of energy in the broader sense is another area where Tiwanaku presents intriguing possibilities. Several researchers have noted that many of the world's most mysterious ancient sites are located at or near geological features that are associated with unusual electromagnetic, gravitational, or geothermal properties. Tiwanaku is situated on the Altiplano, a vast plateau created by tectonic forces in a region of significant seismic and volcanic activity. The Andes are one of the most geologically active mountain ranges on Earth, and the Altiplano is underlain by complex geological structures that include faults, volcanic formations, and deep crustal features. Some researchers have suggested that the builders of Tiwanaku may have chosen their location in part because of specific geophysical properties of the site, such as unusual magnetic anomalies, geothermal activity, or the presence of underground watercourses that produce electromagnetic effects. This idea is speculative, and it is not supported by mainstream geological studies of the site, which have not identified any unusual geophysical properties. However, it is worth noting that the builders of Tiwanaku clearly had a deep understanding of their local environment. The raised field agricultural system, the water management infrastructure, the orientation of the buildings to celestial events, all of these demonstrate an intimate knowledge of the natural world. It is not unreasonable to suppose that this knowledge extended to the geological properties of the site, even if the specific nature of that knowledge is not preserved in the archaeological record. The idea that ancient peoples were sensitive to the geophysical properties of their environment is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Many traditional cultures have concepts of earth energy, ley lines, spirit paths, dragon lines, or similar frameworks that describe a network of natural energy flowing through the landscape. While these concepts are not recognized by modern Western science, they may reflect an empirical awareness of real geophysical phenomena, such as magnetic anomalies, underground watercourses, or seismic activity, experienced and interpreted through a different cultural lens. Whether the builders of Tiwanaku chose their site for geophysical reasons, spiritual reasons, practical reasons, or some combination of all three, we cannot say with certainty. But the question is worth asking, and it may be answered by future research that integrates geological, archaeological, and environmental data in new ways. Let us now examine in greater detail the connections between Tiwanaku and other ancient sites around the world, connections that have been noted by researchers from various disciplines and that raise profound questions about the nature of ancient human civilization. The most frequently cited parallels are with ancient Egypt. Both civilizations built monumental stone structures of extraordinary precision. Both used precisely fitted stone blocks without mortar. Both employed metal clamping systems to join stone blocks. Both possessed advanced astronomical knowledge. Both developed sophisticated agricultural systems to support large urban populations. Both had complex religious systems centered on solar deities, and both left behind monuments that their successors were unable to replicate. These parallels have been noted by scholars for over a century, and they have been interpreted in various ways. The conventional interpretation is convergent evolution, the idea that similar challenges produce similar solutions, and that the parallels between Tiwanaku and Egypt reflect the fact that both civilizations faced similar problems, building in stone, tracking the heavens, feeding large populations, and developed similar solutions independently. This is a reasonable interpretation, and it may well be correct, but it does not fully explain the specificity of some of the parallels. The metal clamping system, for example, is a very specific technique that is not an obvious or inevitable solution to the problem of joining stone blocks. It requires metallurgical skill, specific alloy compositions, and a particular approach to stone preparation that involves cutting matching channels in adjacent blocks. Finding this exact same technique at sites separated by thousands of miles and apparently lacking any direct contact is, at the very least, thought-provoking. Similarly, the astronomical alignments found at both sites are not generic or approximate. They involve precise orientations to specific celestial events, using specific architectural features designed for the purpose. The level of precision at both Tiwanaku and the Egyptian pyramids suggests a shared understanding of astronomical principles that goes beyond simple awareness of the sun's annual cycle. Beyond Egypt, there are parallels with other sites as well. The precision stonework at Tiwanaku has been compared to that found at Sacsayhuaman, near Cusco in Peru, where enormous stone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together with a precision that matches or exceeds that of Tiwanaku. It has been compared to the megalithic walls of Baalbek in Lebanon, where stone blocks weighing over 800 tons were quarried, transported, and placed with extraordinary skill. It has been compared to the precision-cut granite surfaces inside the Great Pyramid, where surfaces are flat to within thousandths of an inch over areas of many square feet. The similarities between these widely separated sites have led some researchers to propose that they share a common heritage, that they were all influenced by or derived from a single source of knowledge and technique that was distributed across the globe in the remote past. This is the lost civilization hypothesis in its strongest form, and it remains highly controversial. But even skeptics must acknowledge that the similarities are real and that they require explanation. Whether that explanation involves a common source, parallel development, or some other mechanism, the fact remains that precision megalithic construction appeared at multiple locations around the world, using similar techniques and achieving similar results in a pattern that is not easily explained by chance alone. One of the most interesting specific comparisons that has been drawn is between the Gate of the Sun at Tiwanaku and the megalithic structures of Easter Island in the southeastern Pacific Ocean. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, is famous for its moai, the enormous stone statues that dot the island's landscape. These statues, carved from volcanic tuff, are among the most iconic archaeological artifacts in the world. But Easter Island also contains features that are less well known and that bear a striking resemblance to elements found at Tiwanaku. The stone walls at Ahuvinapu, one of the ceremonial platforms on Easter Island, are constructed in a style that is virtually identical to the precision-fitted stonework found at Tiwanaku and at Inca sites such as Sacsayhuaman. The blocks are cut with flat surfaces and fitted together without mortar, with joints so tight that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The style is so similar to Andean construction that the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, who studied both sites, argued that there must have been a direct connection between the two. Heyerdahl is best known for his Kon-Tiki expedition of 1947, in which he sailed a balsa wood raft from the coast of South America to the Tuamotu Islands of Polynesia, demonstrating that it was physically possible for ancient South Americans to have reached the Pacific Islands by sea. Heyerdahl believed that the earliest settlers of Easter Island came from South America, bringing with them construction techniques and cultural traditions that originated at Tiwanaku or a related Andean civilization. This theory was rejected by most mainstream archaeologists and anthropologists, who argued that the linguistic, genetic, and archaeological evidence overwhelmingly supported a Polynesian origin for the Easter Island population, and the mainstream position is correct on this point. The Easter Islanders were Polynesian, and their culture was derived from the broader Polynesian cultural tradition. But recent genetic studies have complicated the picture. In 2014, a genetic analysis of modern Easter Islanders found evidence of significant South American admixture, indicating that there was indeed contact between South Americans and Easter Islanders at some point before European arrival. And studies of sweet potato genetics have confirmed that the sweet potato, which is native to South America, was present in Polynesia before European contact, demonstrating that trans-Pacific contact occurred in the pre-Columbian era. These findings do not prove that Tiwanaku builders settled Easter Island, but they do demonstrate that contact between South America and the Pacific Islands was possible and did occur. If ideas, techniques, or traditions were transmitted along with genes and crops, it is conceivable that the similarities between Ahu-Vinapu and Tiwanaku reflect a real, if indirect, connection. Another intriguing set of parallels involves the mythological traditions associated with Tiwanaku and those found in other ancient cultures. We have already discussed the Viracocha legend and its parallels with culture hero myths from other parts of the world. But the parallels extend beyond the figure of the culture hero to the broader cosmological framework. The Tiwanaku cosmology, as far as we can reconstruct it from the archaeological and ethnographic evidence, appears to have been based on a concept of cyclical time. The universe was understood to pass through a series of ages or epochs, each of which ended in a great catastrophe, a flood, an earthquake, a darkness, after which the world was renewed and a new age began. Each age had its own set of beings, its own characteristics, and its own destiny. This concept of cyclical time, with successive ages punctuated by catastrophes, is found in cultures around the world. The Hindu tradition speaks of yugas, vast cycles of creation and destruction lasting thousands or millions of years. The Greek tradition speaks of the ages of man, from the Golden Age to the Iron Age, each one inferior to the last. The Mesoamerican tradition, particularly as expressed in Maya and Aztec cosmology, speaks of successive suns or worlds, each destroyed by a different catastrophe, with the current world being the fifth in the sequence. The Andean version of this cosmology, as recorded by the Spanish chroniclers, describes 4 or 5 successive ages, each associated with a different race of beings and each ending in a catastrophe. The current age, the age in which we live, was preceded by an age of giants who built Tiwanaku and who were destroyed by the Great Flood. The consistency of this cyclical cosmology across widely separated cultures is remarkable. While it could be explained as a universal human tendency to think in cycles, based on the observable cycles of nature such as the seasons, day and night, and the phases of the moon, the specific details of the myths, including the recurring motif of catastrophic destruction by water, suggest that they may preserve a genuine memory of a real event or series of events. The end of the last ice age, approximately 11,600 years ago, was indeed accompanied by catastrophic flooding on a global scale. The melting of the massive ice sheets that covered much of the northern hemisphere released enormous quantities of water, raising sea levels by over 300 feet and inundating coastal areas around the world. This flooding would have been experienced as a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions by any human communities living in the affected areas. If the flood myths found in cultures around the world are memories of this real event, then they are extraordinarily ancient, preserved in oral tradition for over 11,000 years. This may seem improbable, but it is not impossible. Oral traditions have been shown to preserve accurate information over very long periods in some cases. Aboriginal Australian oral traditions, for example, have been shown to contain accurate descriptions of geographical features, such as now submerged coastlines, that date to the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. Could the Tiwanaku cosmology, with its successive ages and catastrophic floods, be a memory of the same events? If so, it would support the idea that the traditions associated with Tiwanaku are extremely ancient, extending back far beyond the conventional date range of the civilization. Let us now examine in greater detail the engineering mysteries of Pumapunku, because there are aspects of this remarkable site that we touched on only briefly in Part 1, and that deserve a more thorough exploration. One of the most puzzling features of Pumapunku is the apparent standardization of the stone blocks. Many of the blocks are not unique, one-of-a-kind pieces. They appear to be standardized components, manufactured to specific dimensions that allow them to be combined in multiple configurations, like the pieces of a modular building system. This is a concept that is familiar to modern engineers and architects, but that is not typically associated with ancient construction. Modular construction requires a level of planning, precision, and systematic thinking that implies a fundamentally different approach to building than the ad hoc, one-off approach used at most ancient sites. It implies the existence of a master plan, a set of specifications, and a manufacturing process that could produce identical or near-identical components on a repeatable basis. The H blocks that we discussed in Part 1 are the clearest example of this modularity. These blocks are cut to uniform dimensions, with features that correspond precisely to matching features on other blocks, allowing them to be assembled in various combinations. The recesses, grooves, and channels on each block are positioned with exact precision, so that when two blocks are brought together, the features align perfectly. How was this precision achieved? In modern manufacturing, the production of identical components to tight tolerances requires the use of jigs, templates, and measuring instruments that ensure each piece conforms to the same specifications. Did the builders of Tiwanaku have equivalent tools? If so, what were they made of and where are they now? No tools of any kind have been found at Tiwanaku that could account for the precision of the stonework. No stone hammers, no copper chisels, no jigs, no templates, no measuring devices. The tools have simply vanished, if they ever existed in a form we would recognize. Some researchers have suggested that the tools were made of perishable materials and have decomposed. Others have suggested that they were removed from the site and taken elsewhere. Others have suggested that the tools were made of stone that is indistinguishable from the natural stone of the area and has therefore been overlooked. All of these explanations are possible, but none of them is particularly satisfying. The absence of tools at a site of such extraordinary craftsmanship is in itself a mystery. Another puzzling aspect of Tiwanaku is the apparent use of precision drilling. Several of the stones contain holes that are perfectly circular in cross-section, uniform in diameter, and smooth-walled. Some of these holes appear to pass entirely through the stone, while others are blind holes drilled to a specific depth. Creating a perfectly circular hole in andesite is not a trivial feat. It requires a drilling tool that is harder than the stone, a method of maintaining consistent pressure and speed, and a way of removing the material as the hole deepens. In modern stoneworking, this is typically done with a diamond-tipped core drill powered by an electric motor. What the builders of Tiwanaku used is unknown. Experimental attempts to replicate the Tiwanaku stonework using Stone-Age tools have been conducted by several researchers with mixed results. It has been demonstrated that it is possible to cut and shape andesite using stone tools and abrasive sand, but the process is extremely slow and does not easily produce the clean, sharp edges and smooth surfaces seen at Tiwanaku. The time required to produce a single block to the observed standards of precision, using primitive tools, has been estimated at months or even years of continuous work. Given the number of blocks at the site, the total labor investment would be staggering, potentially requiring decades or centuries of sustained effort by large teams of skilled workers. This does not mean it was impossible. As we noted in Part 1, humans are capable of extraordinary feats of patience and persistence. But it does mean that the conventional explanation requires us to accept a level of investment and commitment that is difficult to comprehend, and it does not fully explain the apparent ease and consistency with which the precision was achieved. One theory that has gained some traction in recent years is that the stones of Tiwanaku were not carved at all but were cast, like concrete, into molds. This geopolymer theory proposes that the builders of Tiwanaku developed a technique for dissolving or disaggregating natural stone into a paste-like consistency, pouring or packing this paste into molds of the desired shape, and allowing it to harden into a material that is visually and chemically indistinguishable from natural stone. The geopolymer theory was originally proposed in the context of the Egyptian pyramids, where the French materials scientist Joseph Davidovits argued that some of the limestone blocks were not quarried and transported, but were cast in place from a limestone-based geopolymer. Davidovits' theory was controversial but not without support, and some chemical analyses of the pyramid blocks have found anomalies that are consistent with a cast rather than quarried origin. At Tiwanaku, the geopolymer theory would explain several otherwise puzzling features of the stonework. It would explain the extraordinary precision, since a material poured into a mold can take any shape the mold dictates, including perfectly flat surfaces, exact right angles, and uniform holes. It would explain the absence of tool marks, since a cast stone would not bear the marks of carving or grinding. It would explain the apparent standardization, since multiple identical blocks could be produced from the same mold. And it would reduce the transportation problem, since the raw materials for the geopolymer could be transported in a disaggregated form and reconstituted at the construction site, rather than being moved as finished blocks. However, the geopolymer theory has significant weaknesses. No molds or mold fragments have been found at Tiwanaku. No residues of the geopolymer preparation process have been identified. Chemical analyses of the Tiwanaku stones have generally found them to be consistent with natural andesite, without the anomalies that would be expected in a cast material. And the specific chemistry required to dissolve and reconstitute andesite, one of the hardest volcanic stones, would require processes and reagents that are beyond the known capabilities of any ancient society. The geopolymer theory remains an intriguing hypothesis, but it is not yet supported by sufficient evidence to be considered proven. Like so many aspects of Tiwanaku, it raises more questions than it answers. Let us turn now to a feature of Tiwanaku that has received relatively little attention, but that may be among the most significant: the site's relationship with water. We have already discussed the internal drainage system of the Akapana pyramid and the raised field agricultural system that utilized water channels. But the relationship between Tiwanaku and water goes much deeper than these individual features. The entire city appears to have been designed with water management as a central organizing principle. The layout of the buildings, the placement of the canals, the orientation of the structures, all of these suggest a civilization that was not merely using water, but was oriented toward water, organized around water, defined by water. This makes sense given the environment. The Altiplano is a region of seasonal water scarcity, where the difference between a good year and a bad year often comes down to the availability of water. A civilization that could manage water effectively, storing it during the wet season, distributing it during the dry season, protecting crops from frost by using water as a thermal reservoir, would have a decisive advantage over its neighbors. But some researchers have suggested that the relationship between Tiwanaku and water was not merely practical, but was also symbolic and religious. Water, in Andean cosmology, is not simply a resource. It is a sacred substance, a medium of spiritual power, a connection between the earthly world and the world of the gods. The concept of Yakumama, the water mother or water serpent, is central to many Andean traditions, and the flow of water through the landscape is understood as a manifestation of divine energy. If the builders of Tiwanaku shared this understanding, then their water management infrastructure was not merely an engineering project. It was a religious act, a way of channeling and directing sacred energy through the city, creating a landscape that was both physically and spiritually productive. The Akapana pyramid with its internal channels may have been the focal point of this sacred water system. Water falling on the summit as rain, a gift from the sky gods, would have been collected and channeled down through the interior of the pyramid, emerging at the base as a controlled flow. This process could have been understood as a transformation, the conversion of divine rain into earthly water, the mediation between the heavenly and the terrestrial through the medium of the sacred structure. Similarly, the moat that appears to have surrounded parts of the ceremonial core may have served both practical and symbolic functions, defining the sacred space, separating it from the mundane world, and creating a boundary that was marked not by a wall but by water, the most sacred of all substances. This interpretation, while speculative, is consistent with what we know about Andean religious practices from both the archaeological record and the ethnographic observations of later periods. Water was central to Andean spirituality, and it would be surprising if the greatest Andean civilization of the pre-Inca era did not incorporate water into its most important religious structures and practices. We have spoken at length about the material aspects of Tiwanaku, the stones, the engineering, the astronomy, the agriculture. But there is another dimension that deserves our attention, the artistic and aesthetic achievements of the civilization. Tiwanaku art is distinctive, powerful, and immediately recognizable. The artistic style that developed at Tiwanaku was one of the most influential in the pre-Columbian world, spreading across a vast area and influencing artistic traditions for centuries after the civilization's collapse. The most characteristic feature of Tiwanaku art is its geometric precision. The designs are based on strict geometric principles, with complex patterns built up from simple geometric elements such as squares, rectangles, stepped forms, and spirals. The overall effect is one of order, symmetry, and mathematical precision, an aesthetic that is sometimes described as rigid or formal, but that is also deeply satisfying in its consistency and internal logic. The iconography of Tiwanaku art revolves around a set of recurring motifs. The staff god, the central figure of the Gate of the Sun, appears repeatedly across all media, from stone sculpture to pottery to textiles. Puma imagery is pervasive, reflecting the importance of the puma as a symbol of power and authority. Condor imagery is also common, representing the upper world of the sky and the divine. Serpent imagery appears frequently, representing the underworld and the powers of the earth. Together, these three animals, the puma, the condor, and the serpent, form a cosmic triad that appears to represent the three levels of the Andean cosmos: the world of the living, the world of the gods above, and the world of the spirits below. Tiwanaku textiles, of which relatively few have survived due to the perishability of organic materials at the site, are among the finest produced in the ancient world. Those that have been recovered, mostly from dry coastal sites where Tiwanaku influence extended, are masterpieces of weaving technique and artistic design. The colors are vivid, the patterns are complex, and the technical skill required to produce them is extraordinary. Some Tiwanaku textiles have thread counts that rival fine modern fabrics, and the intricacy of their patterns suggests the use of sophisticated loom technology and a deep tradition of textile artistry. Tiwanaku ceramics are equally impressive. The most distinctive ceramic form is the kiro, a tall, slightly flared drinking vessel that was used in ritual contexts, particularly in the communal drinking of chicha, a fermented corn beverage that played a central role in Andean social and religious life. Tiwanaku kiros are decorated with painted designs in a characteristic style, featuring the same geometric patterns and iconographic motifs found in the stone sculpture and textiles. The quality of Tiwanaku ceramics is consistently high, suggesting a standardized production process that may have been controlled by the state or the religious establishment. The clay is well prepared, the firing is even, and the painted decorations are applied with skill and precision. This consistency across a large number of vessels suggests mass production by specialized workshops, another indication of the complexity and organization of Tiwanaku society. The ritual use of psychoactive substances at Tiwanaku, which we touched on briefly in Part 1, deserves a more detailed examination. The snuff trays and inhalation tubes found at Tiwanaku and at Tiwanaku-influenced sites across the southern Andes are among the most elaborately crafted ritual objects produced by any ancient civilization. These trays, typically carved from wood or bone, are decorated with Tiwanaku iconography, including images of the staff god, pumas, condors, and geometric patterns. The tubes used to inhale the powdered psychoactive substance are equally elaborate, sometimes decorated with precious metals or inlaid with precious stones. The primary psychoactive substance used at Tiwanaku appears to have been derived from the seeds of the Anadenanthera colubrina tree, a leguminous tree native to the tropical lowlands east of the Andes. The seeds contain several potent psychoactive compounds, including bufotenine and DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which produce intense visual hallucinations, altered states of consciousness, and experiences that are often described as mystical, visionary, or transcendent. Chemical analysis of residues found on Tiwanaku-style snuff trays has confirmed the presence of Anadenanthera-derived compounds, proving that the trays were used for the inhalation of psychoactive snuff. Analysis of hair from mummified remains associated with Tiwanaku culture has also confirmed the presence of these compounds, demonstrating that their use was not rare or occasional, but was a regular part of the lives of at least some members of the community. The role of psychoactive substances in Tiwanaku religion is a subject of intense scholarly interest. It is now widely accepted that visionary experiences induced by psychoactive substances were a central feature of Tiwanaku ritual practice, and that the elaborate iconography of Tiwanaku art may have been influenced by the visual phenomena experienced during psychoactive trances. The connection between psychoactive experience and artistic production is well documented in other cultural contexts. The visionary art of the Huical people of western Mexico, for example, is directly inspired by the visual hallucinations produced by the ingestion of peyote, a mescaline-containing cactus. The geometric patterns, vivid colors, and complex compositions of Huical art reflect the visual phenomena of the peyote experience in a way that is immediately recognizable to anyone who is familiar with both. If a similar connection existed at Tiwanaku, then the distinctive geometric style of Tiwanaku art may be, at least in part, a representation of the visual world experienced during psychoactive trances. The stepped patterns, the radiating lines, the complex symmetries, all of these are consistent with the form constants and geometric hallucinations produced by tryptamine-based psychoactive substances. This does not diminish the artistic or intellectual achievement of Tiwanaku culture. If anything, it deepens it. The builders of Tiwanaku were not simply copying what they saw in the natural world. They were exploring inner landscapes of consciousness, mapping the visual phenomena of altered states and translating those experiences into stone, ceramic, and textile with extraordinary skill and precision. It is possible, even likely, that the astronomical knowledge encoded in the gate of the sun was connected to this visionary tradition. In many traditional cultures, the observation of the heavens and the experience of altered states of consciousness are closely linked activities, both understood as ways of accessing the deeper structures of reality. The shaman who gazes at the stars and the shaman who ingests the sacred plant are pursuing the same goal: knowledge of the unseen, understanding of the forces that govern the cosmos. If the priests of Tiwanaku combined astronomical observation with psychoactive enhanced visionary experience, they may have developed a way of understanding the universe that was radically different from our modern scientific approach, but no less rigorous in its own terms. The gate of the sun may be the product of this combined knowledge, a synthesis of empirical observation and visionary insight that is encoded in a symbolic language we have not yet fully learned to read. As we approach the conclusion of our exploration, let us consider the legacy of Tiwanaku and what it means for our understanding of human history. Tiwanaku challenges us. It challenges our assumptions about what ancient peoples were capable of. It challenges our chronology of human civilization. It challenges our understanding of how knowledge is created, transmitted, and lost. It challenges our confidence that we have a complete and accurate picture of the human past. The conventional narrative of human history is a story of steady progress, from simple beginnings to increasing complexity, from hunter-gatherers to farmers to city builders to empires. This narrative is broadly correct, but it is also incomplete. It does not account for the peaks and valleys, the rises and falls, the moments of extraordinary achievement followed by periods of decline and forgetting. Tiwanaku is one of those peaks. It represents a moment in human history when a group of people, living in one of the most challenging environments on Earth, achieved something extraordinary. They built a city of stone that has endured for millennia. They developed an agricultural system that was more productive than modern farming in the same area. They created art of stunning beauty and precision. They tracked the heavens with accuracy that rivals modern instruments. And they did all of this without the technologies that we consider essential for such achievements, without iron tools, without the wheel, without writing, without any of the things that our civilization depends on. How did they do it? We do not know, and that is the point, we do not know. And our not knowing is itself a kind of knowledge, a reminder that the human past is deeper, richer, and more complex than any single narrative can capture. The ruins of Tiwanaku sit on the altiplano, battered by wind and sun and rain, slowly crumbling under the assault of time and neglect. Every year a little more is lost. Every year the erosion takes a little more of the detail from the carvings. The frost heave pushes the stones a little further out of alignment. The occasional treasure hunter or vandal does a little more damage. The Bolivian government has recognized the site as a national treasure and has taken steps to protect it. Tiwanaku was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the year 2000, recognizing its outstanding universal value and the importance of its preservation. But funding for conservation and research is limited, and the challenges of protecting a large, open-air site in a remote, high-altitude location are considerable. International research teams continue to work at the site, using increasingly sophisticated technologies to probe its secrets. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed buried structures that have never been excavated. Satellite imagery has mapped the extent of the ancient agricultural system. DNA analysis is providing new insights into the genetic heritage of the ancient population. Underwater archaeology is exploring the submerged ruins of Lake Titicaca. And each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, another fragment of information that brings us closer inch by inch to understanding what Tiwanaku was, who built it, and why. But the puzzle is far from complete. Indeed, it may never be complete. Too much has been lost, too much has been destroyed, too much time has passed. The builders of Tiwanaku took their deepest secrets with them when they departed, leaving behind only the stones and the carvings and the legends. And the stones do not speak in words, they speak in angles and surfaces, in alignments and proportions, in the mute language of geometry and precision. To understand them, we must learn their language, and that is a task that may take generations. There is a moment that every visitor to Tiwanaku describes, a moment that cannot be captured in photographs or measured by instruments. It comes when you are standing in the ruins, perhaps in the Calisassia, perhaps near the Gate of the Sun, and the wind drops for a moment and the light shifts and you feel, suddenly and powerfully, that you are in the presence of something vast and old and not entirely comprehensible. It is the feeling of standing in a place where the boundary between the known and the unknown is very thin, where the comfortable narratives of progress and development that we use to organize our understanding of the past seem suddenly inadequate, where the stones themselves seem to be asking questions rather than providing answers. This feeling is not mystical or supernatural. It is the perfectly rational response of a human mind confronted with evidence that does not fit its existing categories. It is the feeling of genuine mystery, the recognition that there are things in the world that we do not understand and may never understand, no matter how many tools we bring to bear on them. Tiwanaku is one of those things. It is a place where the past reaches out and touches the present, where the achievements of an ancient people rebuke the complacency of the modern world, where the question, "How was this possible?" is not a rhetorical flourish but a genuine, urgent, unanswered inquiry. Let us consider one more dimension of the Tiwanaku mystery before we bring our exploration to its close. The question of what happened after the collapse and what, if anything, survived. When the Tiwanaku civilization fell, sometime around 1100 of the Common Era, the population of the city and its surrounding territory did not simply vanish. They dispersed, fragmenting into smaller communities that settled across the Altiplano and the surrounding regions. These communities, which would later be collectively identified as the Aymara kingdoms, retained some of the cultural traditions of their Tiwanaku ancestors, including elements of their art, their religion, their agricultural techniques, and their social organization. The Aymara kingdoms were never as powerful or as centralized as Tiwanaku had been. They were regional polities, frequently in conflict with one another, lacking the monumental architecture and the centralized control that had characterized the Tiwanaku state. But they were not primitive. They maintained sophisticated agricultural systems, complex social hierarchies, and rich artistic traditions that owed a clear debt to the Tiwanaku heritage. When the Inca Empire expanded into the Altiplano region in the 15th century, it encountered these Aymara kingdoms and incorporated them, sometimes peacefully and sometimes by force, into the Inca state. The Inca recognized the cultural achievements of the Aymara and made use of their agricultural knowledge, their textile traditions, and their understanding of the high-altitude environment. In this way, elements of the Tiwanaku heritage were absorbed into the Inca cultural tradition and preserved in modified form into the colonial period and beyond. Some researchers have argued that the Inca architectural tradition, with its emphasis on precisely fitted stone blocks, was directly influenced by the Tiwanaku example. The famous walls of Sacsayhuaman, with their enormous polygonally shaped blocks fitted together without mortar, bear a striking resemblance to certain Tiwanaku techniques, and it is plausible that the Inca masons learned from or were inspired by the Tiwanaku ruins that they encountered during their expansion. The modern Aymara people, who number several million and inhabit the Altiplano regions of Bolivia, Peru, and Chile, are the most direct cultural descendants of the Tiwanaku civilization. Their language, their agricultural practices, their textiles, and many elements of their worldview can be traced back to the Tiwanaku era, though they have been modified and enriched by centuries of subsequent development, including the profound impact of the Inca and Spanish colonial periods. The Aymara relationship with the ruins of Tiwanaku is complex. The site holds deep spiritual significance for many Aymara communities who regard it as a place of origin and power, a tangible connection to their ancestral past. Annual ceremonies are still held at the site, and the ruins are considered a living part of the cultural landscape rather than a dead relic of a vanished era. At the same time, the Aymara oral traditions about Tiwanaku are fragmentary and often mixed with elements from later periods, making it difficult to extract reliable historical information from them. The legend of the giants, the stories of Viracocha, the accounts of the flood, all of these have been transmitted orally for many generations, and each generation has inevitably added, subtracted, and modified the stories according to its own understanding and needs. This is the nature of oral tradition. It preserves the essence of events while transforming the details. It transmits cultural memory across generations while adapting that memory to the changing circumstances of each new era. The oral traditions of the Aymara are valuable, but they are not a transparent window onto the Tiwanaku past. They are a mirror, reflecting both the ancient events they describe and the modern world of the communities that tell them. As we near the end of our journey, let us address one final question, perhaps the most important question of all. What does Tiwanaku mean for us today? It is easy and perhaps tempting to treat Tiwanaku as a curiosity, an interesting puzzle from the remote past that has no bearing on our modern lives, but this would be a mistake. Tiwanaku has lessons to teach us if we are willing to listen. The first lesson is humility. Our civilization, with all its technological marvels, is not the first to achieve great things. Before us, other civilizations rose, flourished, and fell, leaving behind achievements that we cannot fully explain or replicate. The precision of the Puma Punku stones, the astronomical knowledge of the gate of the sun, the agricultural genius of the raised field system, these are not the products of a primitive or backward people. They are the achievements of a sophisticated, knowledgeable, and creative civilization that was, in some respects, our equal. If such a civilization could rise and fall, leaving behind only ruins and legends, what does that say about the permanence of our own achievements? We tend to assume that our civilization is different, that our knowledge is secure, that our technology is too embedded in the fabric of daily life to be lost. But the builders of Tiwanaku may have thought the same thing, and they were wrong. The second lesson is curiosity. The mysteries of Tiwanaku are an invitation to look deeper, to question assumptions, to challenge orthodoxies, and to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The conventional narrative of human history, while broadly correct, is incomplete. There are gaps, anomalies, and unexplained phenomena that suggest a more complex and more interesting past than the textbooks describe. Tiwanaku is one of those anomalies, and it demands not dismissal but investigation. The third lesson is respect. The builders of Tiwanaku were not aliens, not supernatural beings, not mythological giants. They were human beings, people like us, facing challenges that we can barely imagine and meeting those challenges with ingenuity, determination, and creativity. They lived at 13,000 feet above sea level, in one of the harshest environments on Earth, and they built a civilization that endured for over a millennium and left a cultural legacy that survives to this day. They deserve our respect, our admiration, and our sustained effort to understand what they achieved and how they achieved it. There is a final image that stays with those who visit Tiwanaku and that we should carry with us as we bring this journey to a close. The Gate of the Sun stands in the northwest corner of the Kalisasya, as it has stood for centuries, possibly for millennia. It is cracked. At some point in the distant past, a force of unknown nature split the great stone slab from top to bottom, leaving a fissure that runs diagonally across the face of the gate. Whether this crack was caused by an earthquake, a lightning strike, a deliberate act of vandalism, or the simple stress of time and temperature on a massive piece of stone, nobody knows. But the gate still stands. Despite the crack, despite the erosion, despite the centuries of neglect and abuse, the Gate of the Sun still stands. The staff god still gazes outward with his radiating eyes. The attendant figures still process inward, eternal in their carved stone motion. The calendar still marks the movements of the heavens as it has done since the day it was carved, whenever that day was. There is something profoundly moving about this persistence. The people who carved the gate are gone. Their language is lost. Their names are forgotten. The details of their lives, their loves, their fears, their daily struggles have vanished as completely as if they had never existed. But the gate remains, the stone endures, the carvings speak, in a language we are still learning to read, of a knowledge and a vision that transcended the mortality of their creators. This is the power of stone. This is why the builders of Tiwanaku chose to carve their most important knowledge not in wood, not in textile, not in any perishable medium, but in the hardest stone they could find. They were building for eternity. They were sending a message to the future, to us, to anyone who would come after them and stand before the gate and wonder. What was the message? We do not know the full content, but we can guess at its spirit. It was a declaration that we were here, we understood. We mastered the stones and the stars. We built something that would outlast us, outlast our civilization, outlast the very memory of our existence. We carved our knowledge into the bones of the earth so that even when everything else was gone, the knowledge would remain, waiting to be rediscovered, and it is waiting still. The Gate of the Sun stands at 13,000 feet above the sea, in one of the most remote and inhospitable landscapes on Earth, bearing the weight of millennia on its cracked but unbroken surface. It has survived the fall of the civilization that created it, the rise and fall of the Inca Empire, the Spanish conquest, the colonial period, the modern era. It has been battered by wind, scorched by sun, frozen by frost, and cracked by forces unknown, but it still stands. And it still has secrets to tell. The carvings on its surface encode knowledge that we have not yet fully decoded. The calendar it contains tracks phenomena that we are only now beginning to understand. The deity at its center gazes outward with eyes that may see things we cannot, and the 48 attendant figures process inward, bearing their staffs and their condor faces, carrying a message that has been waiting thousands of years for an audience capable of receiving it. We may be that audience. Or we may not. We may be the generation that finally cracks the code of the gate of the sun, that finally understands what the builders of Tiwanaku knew, that finally pieces together the fragments of a lost knowledge and restores it to its proper place in the story of human civilization. Or we may pass the task on to our children or our children's children, who will stand before the gate as we do and wonder as we do, and perhaps know a little more than we do. The mystery endures. The stones speak for those who have ears to hear, and the gate of the sun stands open as it has always stood open, inviting us to step through, to cross the threshold between the known and the unknown, and to discover what lies on the other side. There is a quality to the light on the altiplano that is different from anywhere else on Earth. At 13,000 feet, there is less atmosphere between you and the sun. The light is more intense, more direct, more revealing. Colors are sharper, shadows are darker. The contrast between light and dark is more extreme. Everything is clearer, more defined, more present. Perhaps this is why the builders of Tiwanaku chose this place, not just for its proximity to the sacred lake, not just for its clear view of the heavens, but for its light. In this light, everything is visible, nothing is hidden. The stones show every detail, every line, every surface with a clarity that is almost supernatural. In this light, the gate of the sun is not just a monument. It is a revelation. The carvings leap from the surface with a vividness that photographs cannot capture. The staff god seems almost alive, his radiating eyes burning with an intelligence that transcends the stone from which he is carved. The attendant figures seem to move, their stone wings spreading, their stone staffs rising, their stone faces turning toward the central deity with an expression that is somewhere between reverence and recognition. This is the power of Tiwanaku. It is not just a ruin. It is a presence, it is a voice from the deep past that speaks across the millennia with a clarity and authority that demands attention. And what it says, what it has always said, is this: there is more to the story than you know. The history of human civilization is not a simple line from primitive to advanced, from ignorance to knowledge, from darkness to light. It is a complex, winding path, full of peaks and valleys, advances and retreats, moments of extraordinary achievement followed by long periods of forgetting. The path has been longer than we thought, the peaks have been higher than we imagined, and the valleys have been deeper and darker than we want to acknowledge. Tiwanaku is one of those peaks. It stands as proof that the human past contains wonders that we have not yet fully appreciated, mysteries that we have not yet fully solved, and lessons that we have not yet fully learned. It challenges our complacency, our certainty, and our assumption that we are the pinnacle of human achievement. We are not the pinnacle. We are a point on a curve, a moment in a journey that began long before us and will continue long after us. And the builders of Tiwanaku, whoever they were, whatever they knew, wherever their knowledge came from, were fellow travelers on that journey, fellow seekers of the truth, fellow stargazers who looked up at the same sky and wondered at the same stars and sought, as we seek, to understand the vast and beautiful mystery of the universe. Their stones are their testimony, their carvings are their voice. And the gate of the sun is their gift to the future, a gift that we are still in the process of unwrapping, still in the process of understanding, still in the process of receiving. The ruins stand, the mystery endures, the search continues, and somewhere in the silence between the wind and the stone, the builders of Tiwanaku are waiting for us to understand. On the high plateau of Bolivia, where the air is thin and the sky is infinite, where the wind scours the grass and the frost cracks the stone, where the ruins of a forgotten civilization stand as silent witnesses to an age of wonders, the gate of the sun faces east. Every morning, the first rays of the sun strike the carved surface of the gate and illuminate the face of the staff god. Every morning, the same light that warmed the faces of the builders thousands of years ago touches the stone and brings the carvings to life. Every morning, the gate performs its ancient function, marking the passage of the sun across the sky, tracking the movements of the heavens, measuring the cycles of time. The gate does not know that its builders are gone. The gate does not know that the city lies in ruins, that the fields are fallow, that the canals are dry, that the language is forgotten. The gate knows only the sun and the stars and the turning of the earth, the eternal rhythms that it was designed to track, the cosmic patterns that it was carved to record. And every morning, without fail, the sun rises, the light falls on the stone, and the gate fulfills its purpose. It has been doing this for a very long time, and it will continue to do this long after we too are gone. This is the message of Tiwanaku. This is the lesson of the gate of the sun. This is what the builders wanted us to know. The cosmos endures, the cycles continue, the sun rises, and the human capacity for wonder, for knowledge, for achievement against impossible odds is as old as the stones themselves. Remember them, learn from them, and carry their story forward so that it is never lost again. This concludes our exploration of Tiwanaku and the Gate of the Sun. The ruins stand, the mystery endures, and the search for understanding continues.